across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome to the show. Alex Phillips here until 10 o'clock, once again sitting in for the inimitable Mr. Kevin O'Sullivan, who is filling his little vegetarian face with onion and potato pasties down in God's own county of Cornwall. If you see him and his equally grumpy dog, do make sure you say hello to them on the beach. Right, I've got so much coming up for you in the show. We are still stuck in the maelstrom of what is a woman. It don't matter, you can spend gazillions of pounds, 5 years, go to the highest court in the land, and it's still being chewed over like a bit of carrion in the Masai Mara and a flock of vultures. I mean, just no, men shouldn't be in women's toilets. It is very, very simple. Isabel Oakeshot's going to be talking about that, and of course, Sir Keir Starmer trying to look cool with a St George's Day flag. Yeah, mate, we've never forgotten the Emily Thornberry thing. We're going to be discussing all of that and, of course, a bit of geopolitics. We haven't touched in on that much this week, but there is plenty going on. There was a sort of Easter ceasefire. I'm doing air quotes for those of you listening on the radio. And now they're really trying to push ahead with peace talks, apparently. Russia's saying that they demand that the US recognise that Crimea belongs to them. Bit of a test for Donald Trump. Quite how Russophile are you, my friend? We might be finding that out in the coming days. But what is this actually going to mean for the coalition of the willing, which I keep hearing? What is the phrase they're using? The just and lasting peace. So it's this thing in politics. There's like this set of words, this text, this mantra that you've got to repeat. And so now with Ukraine, it's a just and lasting peace among the coalition of the willing. So what does this mean? Because that's kind of us, right? We are part of that. We're giving away our fish so we can sell weapons to Europe to do all the defence stuff that they've been relying on America to do. Then, in the second hour, we're speaking to James Melville. You know him, isn't he fantastic? We're going to get him to mop up all of the stories of the week. And, well, it goes on and on, actually. I could tell you the whole run order, but in fact, why don't you stay tuned? That way, there'll be a degree of suspense. But what shouldn't be served with a degree of suspense is the fact that I want you to tell me your thoughts and your feelings and share, because sharing is caring, and this is what this show is all about. No, we're not LBC. I'm not going to be like James O'Brien and growl at you and look like a madman who's probably got some psychological disturbances and then hang up on you, make a spectacle of you and put it all over the internet for my own sociopathic delight. That ain't what we do here. This is more like a therapy session. This is proper talk radio. This is where you get to call in and feel like you're sitting amongst friends. Imagine it's a sunny day on a Sunday. It's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. There's a sort of 3/4 of a pint of warm lager on a pub bench. You're sitting there with your nearest and dearest, chewing the cud, surrounded by a few annoying wasps. But that's just Britain. That's kind of the vibe, okay? So if you want to pull up a pew and join us for some communal catharsis, the number to call is 0344 499 1000. Your standard network rate, so it's the same as ordering a takeaway or speaking to your nan or, you know, telling your plumber that the leak hasn't been repaired. You can use that number as well to send me a WhatsApp message or indeed leave me a little voice note on WhatsApp. I really do like those. I call out for them every time because there's something quite delightful about when my producer writes on the screen in front of me, such and such has left me a voice note, and I know it's going to be a minute of well, who knows, surprises. I never know what they're going to say, and then I get to listen to them firsthand here on air. You will be vetted though, keep it clean. You can also send me a text message 87222. Remember to write the word talk before you text. That way it dodges all of the unused junk and apparatus bouncing around the planets within our meagre little solar system within the context of the entire universe and finds its way to the aerial that is atop of talk towers and therefore down through the pipelines to my computers in front of me. Okay, right, with all of those T's and C's done, let's get on with the show and welcome aboard the wonderful, inimitable Isabel Oakeshott, Talk's international editor. Isabel, thank you for coming on again. I'm a glut of Isabel. I had you yesterday, I have you today. I'm truly being spoiled. Right. let's get on with today's PMQs. I'm sure you watched them. And Kemi Badenoch, I think very much in her comfort zone, right? Where she likes all the culture stuff. She's been very clear from the beginning where she stood on the he, she, it, they, them, their, these, and all the rest of it. And she really rather socked it to Starmer today.
She did, and she used some language that I'm not sure I would dare use on the radio, but maybe since it's not been declared to be unparliamentary language, then it can also be talk radio language, because they set quite a high standard of civility in the Houses of Parliament. So she suggested that the Prime Minister might not have, and I quote here, the balls for this debate. And for once, Kemi Badenoch, who has generally really disappointed in Prime Minister's questions, actually seemed to have the upper hand in the debate today. She demanded to know if the Prime Minister would be apologising to the MP Rosie Duffield, who had an awful time after sticking her neck out on this debate and trying to stand up for safe women's only spaces. And needless to say, we didn't get any kind of apology from the Prime Minister. There's a brilliant cartoon in one of the papers tonight which links the whole trans debate to the death of the Pope, and it shows white smoke coming out of Westminster, and it says that's a sign that Keir Starmer has finally decided what a woman is. And I think I'm still not convinced that he's comfortable with the Supreme Court judgment by any means whatsoever.
No, I don't think he is. And actually, what's so perilous about this is everyone's celebrating this like this is now fait accompli. Like we can all move forward, and it's very clear now how people are going to interpret this legislation and what will happen next. I have huge fears, actually, that there's going to be a push to make all bathrooms unisex. So to get around the problem of single-sex spaces must be for women only, that actually what will happen is increasingly we will find facilities are unisex where it's possible. But also, I don't know what the next step is going to be with the ECHR over this, because a lot of that legislation that came into the UK, you know, trans rights and all the rest of it, didn't emanate from this country. It emanated from that court in Strasbourg. And I wonder if they're going to want to stick their oar in again. And if they were to do so, and we know that they are supreme to even the Supreme Court, if the ECHR, if someone were to take their particular case up to the ECHR and win, and then all of a sudden you've got, you know, the canon of legislation, the case precedent is then used by barristers in courts, if Starmer's going to have to go back to say, well, the courts now say this, and we're going to end up back where we started.
Well, I very much hope that doesn't happen. I'm still confused. I know this is a subject that our colleague Julia Hartley-Brewer has talked of a lot on our station, as to what exactly are the rights that trans people now won't have as a result of this ruling. So I don't know, can you think of any? What rights are they going to be denied as a result of this ruling?
Well, this is the thing, yeah. I mean, they were it was almost like they were told that they had access to all of these things. They could be in these sports as, you know, the opposite sex. They could do all that. And now they're being told, well, no, you can't. But they were never rights in the first place.
And so it will be interesting, as you say, to see if this is in some way further tested in a different court, you know, some supranational thing, as in under ECHR. But if that were to happen, then it's only going to add to the weight of public opinion, which I think now is, I'm guessing, I haven't actually seen any polling on this recently, but I suspect that a very significant majority of British voters want us out of the ECHR. And I think that's a fairly recent thing. You know, it's only fairly recently that I think people have fully or even partially understood just how insidious our membership of ECHR is, what the extent to which it ties our hands. It wasn't fully explored during the Brexit debate, actually. I think we all found it just one thing too many at that time. And it's only now in terms of the whole immigration context, where we've got this apparent inability continually to be able to actually deport foreign criminals for all sorts of reasons under ECHR, that I think people have had enough of it.
Without a doubt, I think you've pretty much done the litmus test of the nation's opinion. We've just seen all the chicken nugget stories, and now I can't be deported because I'm a rapist and they might kill me back at home. We've seen a glut of it over the past few months, and I think we've all come to the conclusion that it is a rot within our society. But one thing that really is a rot within our society, to me, is how we got here in the first place, right? That's what I don't understand is, I don't know if you can sort of map it out to me, because, people go, well, it's people being brainwashed at university, well, it's this, well, it's that. But 5 years ago, there wasn't this whole, bearded Bart must be able to go into the bogs and, pleasure himself while listening to a woman urinate. It wasn't a thing, right? That would have been monstrous. And the acceleration of this campaign and the venal, the vacuous, the vainglorious, the vindictive politicians who went along with what was so evidently immoral, because it's always been immoral to suppose that a man can say he's a woman and go into women's toilets. Can you imagine even saying that 10 years ago? A man can say he's a woman and go into the women's loos. People would have gone, are you crazy? And yet that is what our own Prime Minister was fighting to have happen. It wasn't long ago that the Labour Party were pushing for the gender recognition certificate until they saw Nicola Sturgeon bury herself in the backyard and went, this might not win elections. But how did we get to the stage that politicians who are supposed to be the vanguard of our interests, who are supposed to democratically represent what we need and want from our government, were forcing all of us to go along with this perverse charade?
It is extraordinary. I mean, you're right about your time frame, because I clearly remember being on the BBC, somewhere between 5 and 10 years ago, and also on Sky News many years ago, where this debate was starting to get into was just beginning to get into the papers. And I clearly remember saying, you can count the number of people this will affect on the fingers of a few hands. And somehow or other, over a very relatively short period of time, that fact, because it is still a very tiny number of people, has nonetheless not affected the amount of bandwidth this has taken up. And I think it's, as always with these things, it's where you've got very, very organized lobbying. You've got very, very shrill voices, and you've got a political class that is terrified of not seeming to be #kind about everything. The whole philosophy, the whole #BeKind thing has been utterly, utterly corrosive and has resulted in many, many evils in the name of phony kindness. And this is so much goes to the heart of the failures of the Tory government. They were so terrified of being accused of being nasty that they allowed this thing to take off. They allowed this juggernaut to continue gathering pace until it began smashing things down. And those things that it was smashing and continues to smash are things that the majority of us hold dear, like fundamental identity and the sanctity of certain things.
But this is exactly what I'm saying, because it's not just so much as they've been a little bit weak. They have actually willfully ushered in pure wickedness when they have essentially rolled out the red carpet for a pervert to go and get into the very intimate spaces of women, and not just women, girls, little kiddies, because there was all of these cases about, some sort of trans brownie leader who wanted to sleep in the tent with the children. And you just think, that's disgraceful. That is disgusting. If that person had any self-awareness, it'd be like, look, I will sleep in my own tent. Why do you need to be in a tent with the kiddies?
It's sort of so much worse than all of this, because it's permeated all of our institutions. And the worst of all is the permeation of the educational establishment, to the extent you've got little children being taught that there are any number of genders and that they can identify as whatever they choose. And let's not forget the absolute horror of schools and teachers being encouraged and allowed to call children one thing in the classroom and hide that from their parents. So, if if Jennifer suddenly decides she wants to be James, schools have been allowed to call her James, and hide that from parents. This is grotesque. You know, this thing has snowballed into something so poisonous, and has caused so much suffering in ways that one could never really have imagined 5 to 10 years ago. Think of all those confused young people who, via the Tavistock Clinic, were notorious Tavistock Clinic in London, the NHS's gender, whatever it was, support service it was probably called, were indulged and in many cases actively encouraged to do terrible things to their own bodies when they were still adolescent and not really sure about who they were. And that surgery or that hormonal treatment has been irreversible, or is only reversible with the most terrible trauma. That's what the hashtag be kind culture, you know, tolerant of everybody and their weird perversions, that's where it's got us.
Well, this is the thing. It wasn't just sordid. I would go as far as saying it was satanic, because what was going on was children, people's sons and daughters, kiddies, were being actively encouraged to think they had a mental illness and then actively encouraged to mutilate their bodies. That is like some sort of really effed up death cult style stuff. If we saw this going on in any other country, we'd say they were committing human rights offences. And yet it just went along, as you said, like a sort of unbound juggernaut. Now, J.K. Rowling has accused Sir Keir Starmer of cowardice. Loads of people are asking for him to apologise to people like Rosie Duffield, who was essentially lobbed out of the party for heresy and faced death threats and demonisation for, I don't know, wanting women to be safe. But I'm not normally a vengeful person. Really, I'm not. I'm water under a bridge and people get swept up in things and everything of its time. But this has been so serious, so perverse and so shocking that if we don't have some sort of backlash, some sort of recompense for the ill deeds and malevolent actions that we have seen come to pass with all of this campaign, then I don't think a lesson has been learned. My worry is that what's going to happen is about 10, 20 years down the line, maybe 10 years down the line, actually maybe sooner than that, people who have undergone gender realignment surgeries might litigate against the teachers who encouraged it, litigate against the NHS who allowed it, or the doctors or clinicians in private practice who enabled it, potentially litigate against the government itself if it becomes some sort of, you know, infected blood style scandal. But the problem then, of course, is the people who will pay the damages will be us, the taxpayers, who had this sick ideology forced upon us.
Well, there has already been such litigation. You know, there are already people who are taking organisations to court over all of this stuff, and the Tavistock Clinic has been very much part of the controversy there. My own view, this is my personal view, and perhaps it's controversial. I don't think it would be controversial for most of our listeners. I don't think the NHS should be having anything to do with gender realignment or reassignment surgeries. I don't think that is something that our hard-pressed health service should be getting involved with. It is a choice that people are making, that they want to try to be something that they are biologically not. And I don't think that's something that should be funded by the taxpayer. Now, I appreciate other people will have different views on that. They'll say that I'm being harsh. I'm not for a minute saying that it's not very painful and difficult to be confused about your identity. But in my view, the NHS should stop performing these procedures. I wouldn't want to see any more hormonal treatment of children or anyone under the age of 18 at all. I think that in years to come, we will look back on this and the NHS's part in it with sheer horror.
Right.
I quite appreciate that there will be people who will ring in and be angry about that. I'm just saying that's my view.
Oh, I go much further than that, if I'm honest with you. I actually think people should be imprisoned. It's a bit like looking back at the Victorian era where there were forced lobotomies for people who are suffering from some form of trauma. This has been pure, unadulterated, sadistic paganism, frankly speaking, and I actually won't be happy until I see people go to prison, because there can be no other form of justice, quite frankly, for destroying the life of children and then mortgaging the safety of women. I mean, don't get me started on all the other things. Actually, do get me started, because then we can pick those up after the break. Isabel, stay with me, because there's so much more that we need to vent about. If you also want to vent, the number to call, 03444 991 Do you think that people need to be sent to prison for taking part in essentially a campaign to encourage young people to have mental illness and mutilate their bodies? Do you think that anybody who has actively, willfully been party to this campaign should face consequences? I do. I'm sorry, but I do. 87222 is the number to text me. Remember to write the word talk before your text. We're on X at talkTV. Come on, keep those opinions rolling in. Isabel and I can't wait to hear them. We're back after this.
Keir Starmer hates talking about this topic.
Yeah.
He only ever speaks about it when absolutely forced to. And in the past, even then, he's just avoided the question altogether. So I think the reason that we're not seeing him come out really strongly against these protests with some really disgusting, violent, misogynistic placards is because he just wants to move on. He's said, okay, fine, I concede, a woman can't have a willy. I don't want to talk about this anymore.
Yeah.
I think that is what we're seeing, and that's why he's not coming out stronger.
Competition's a good thing, and the Tories have had their chance. They had 14 years to turn the country around and make it grow again and great again, and they did the opposite. And so people won't forgive and they won't forget. That's why we're surging in the polls. That's why we are in almost every poll now ahead of the Tories, very often by more than the margin of error. And so we will just keep doing what we seem to be doing pretty well. And obviously we're looking forward to the results coming through on May the 2nd from all
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello Hello there, welcome back. Isabel Oakeshott is still with us. Isabel, do you know, I feel like just going on a bit of a tangential wander when I chat with you because you're so wise and so interesting and have such brilliant points of view that the world needs to hear. We were just talking about sort of summoning in the wickedness and the evils of forcing kids to start to contemplate whether they have a mental illness and mutilate their bodies. And I just wanted to just throw in a curveball here because something else I think is a wickedness that I don't think we're talking about enough. I think all too often we hear something's coming down the track, so maybe we should be worried about it, and then it happens. But we're not outraged enough before the event. And one thing that I think is so deeply dangerous and perilous, which this government is going to probably force upon us, is a foreign blasphemy law, i.e. Legislation surrounding Islamophobia. I wanted to know what your thoughts on that were.
Well, first of all, I'm going to just make a confession. Since you've been saying all these things about me being so wise, all I was thinking about in the break was I had a little packet of mini eggs on the desk next to me, and I was just craving those mini eggs. So you just caught me finishing off eating a mini egg, and I apologise for anyone who saw that.
Mini eggs are amazing. I don't know how you stay so svelte when you fill your face with such deliciousness.
It's a lot of effort keeping the show on the road. On the so-called Islamophobia, I don't really accept there's such a thing as Islamophobia. I think it finds this very complex concept. I'm just not really buying it. I think we've all got to be very careful about manners and respect, and most decent people agree with that. You know, the thought of watching someone burn a Bible, I'm a Christian, is a horrible thing to me, but I don't think that I would want to see them jailed for doing that. Equally, if I took a copy of the Quran and I was firmly in the UK and I burnt it, I'd never do such a thing. But if I did that, I don't think I should go to jail for that. But it would be an appalling thing to do. You know, I occasionally do feel something very powerful when I see people saying something that I would consider blasphemous about Jesus or something like that. I'm not particularly religious, but I was brought up to be. But it doesn't mean that I think that we should get all, you know, prisony about it. I think that far too much time is spent in politics creating laws that we then come to regret for things that aren't needed. We're failing to address the absolute fundamentals in our society. And such a law, if it happened, would be, the aim of it would be to improve multiculturalism, to make our society more integrated. And I think it would have the opposite effect. And, you know, the truth is the reason that the UK is so divided is not for want of Islamophobia laws. It's for want of a basic understanding and expectations from everybody of what our identity is in the UK. Who are we? And what are the minimum standards that we expect of each other? And other countries do this pretty well. They know who they are. They don't even allow foreign flags to be waved within their borders, right, because this is who we are. And I'm afraid in the UK, we spend so much time, the government and institutions spend so much time apologising for who we are in our past and accepting anything goes from people who come to live in the UK, that has resulted in a total failure of multiculturalism. It can work, it just doesn't in the UK, and Islamophobia laws are no way to address that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd go even further. I don't think that this is UK, you know, sort of, let's say, British-born Judeo-Christian people saying, oh, we must look after our Muslim neighbours because people are very critical of Islam because of all the terrorist attacks. It's nothing to do with the moderate Muslims. I think that the lobby groups who are pushing for Islamophobia are very sinister. I think that there's a deliberate intent to force the government to create what will essentially be a trap that extremists lay down so they can go about quite happily their campaign, their little personal sick campaign, to push their particular interpretation of that religion onto a country that should have nothing to do with it. And then once it's all sort of shrouded in legislation, not only will people not be able to critique the more perilous and worst aspects of what might be going on in mosques, what might be going on with radical preachers, measures, but also it will actively encourage the sort of social outpouring that we've seen with these pro-Palestine marches. I think this legislation has probably come from people who are very calculated in what they want to see happen and why, and that once again, a bit like the whole trans thing, this government are being taken for absolute mugs because they're going along with it. I think it's a wickedness in our midst. I really do. It's deeply worrying me at the moment. Should I be deeply worried about the fact that instead of going, it is St. George's Day, hurrah, these are all the brilliant things that England has done. Guess what the English people invented? Gravity, the vaccines, the radio, the television, the steam train, the first suspension bridge, and all these fantastic things that we, this little tiny little nation, has put into the world. No, instead of doing that, what he did was had to hark back to the riots and say that he's going to reclaim our flag, basically saying, instead of just going, let's celebrate England, basically going, it's a dirty flag though, isn't it? It's dirty, it's related to the hard right.
I mean, I actually couldn't believe today's performance on this. You know, it's so obvious what he's doing there. The Labour Party is terrified of the rise of reform. Reform has a lot of supporters who are very passionate about English identity in all the right and positive ways. And this was Keir Starmer's answer to that. Oh, I better get out a few St. George's flags, put them in the backdrop and sort of start saying we all need to reclaim it and it's our flag. Sorry.
But reclaim it from whom? That's what...
Way too little, too late. And we all know what he's saying there. And it wasn't even if we had to guess, was it? Because in the same breath, he went on about the far-right riots. Give me a break. Honestly, it's insulting, isn't it? Yeah. Actually, what we need to reclaim the flag from is all the people that are currently waving other flags within our country. I mean, just look at, for example, it's a minor example, but just look at the last night of the proms every September. You know, previously a great patriotic ceremony, which up until very recently was an absolute sea of EU flags. So we need to reclaim our flag from the EU. We need to reclaim our flag from all the people that take to the streets every other weekend and wave Palestinian flags. I mean, that is what the problem is. It's not so-called far-right thugs. I think it would be living in cloud cuckoo land to pretend that the English flag hasn't been in the past tarnished by, for example, football hooliganism. And that is a great pity. But it's the Union Jack, I think, that we really need to be making more of, and we should be proud to fly it. In fact, you see far more pride flags than you do Union Jacks.
But I think that we need to reclaim the Cross of St. George from the grubby hands of someone like Sir Keir Starmer, who cannot bear to say Happy St. George's Day without making some sort of derisory, remark or allusion to the fact that being in any way patriotic could be a dog whistle for extremism. Why couldn't he have just said Happy St. George's Day? Why couldn't King Charles have said Happy Easter without going, oh, and Islam? Why can't we just have our own stuff? Why can't we have our own stuff? Why can't we have our religious holidays without having to give a nod to everyone else? Why can't we love our country without having to do some sort of disclaimer that we're not about to join the KKK? Why can't we just have our stuff back, please? That's what I want to see happen. Oh, right, we're going to take a break now so I can let off some steam. Then I'm going to be quizzing Isabel all about whether a Conservative and Reform coalition could be on the cards. We're back after this.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Isabel, I've got to ask you this because I've seen this come up time and time again. Are Reform and the Conservatives going to do a deal? And it always seems to somehow accidentally leak out of the Conservative camp. Do you think that any sort of, handshake and promise to either put down weapons against each other or step down in critical seats or potentially form a government together is ever going to be on the cards?
I mean, so much to say on this one. Unfortunately, there's really, really bad blood here. As a result of betrayals and perceived betrayals, and we go back to the high days of the Brexit Party, and when the Brexit Party stood down because Boris Johnson was supposedly going to, take us out of the EU, which he technically did. The Brexit Party stood down in a bunch of seats and got absolutely zip in return. And, there's a long history of mistrust there between the Brexit Party leadership and then the Reform leadership and the Conservative Party. But far more important than all of that, is the monstrous betrayal of the Conservative Party of the British people. The Conservative Party is guilty of the most appalling treachery when it comes to immigration. And this is stuff that is going to be really, really difficult to undo. For the best part of 14 years, they repeatedly promised and didn't deliver. Not only did they not deliver cutting immigration, they did the absolute opposite. I think it's unforgivable. I know the Reform Party leadership consider it utterly unforgivable, and they will always say privately and publicly, never trust a Tory. So I think this is going to be very difficult. Reform is riding high. We don't know how things are going to come out in the local elections. Maybe the Tories will do better than anticipated. Maybe Labour will do really well. Who knows? But as of this moment, I'm just talking about where the polls are today. Reform in the latest YouGov is 2 points ahead of the other parties, of Labour and the Tories. Why on earth would Nigel Farage be talking about doing any deals with the Tory party, discredited as it is and under woefully weak leadership?
Yeah, it's funny, you talk about what happened in 2019, but I also remember all of the dastardly tactics that the Conservatives employed running up to that. They were on the phone lines going after every single Reform candidate, publishing names and contact details in newspapers. So dirty, filthy. It's a sort of behaviour you would expect by Erdogan in Turkey. And I can remember being horrified by some of the blackmail and some of the sort of extortion that they were willing to try and put in place that the Brexit Party were having none of. And I think you're right. I just can't see bygones being bygones. But how many Tories do you think, when they finally see in about 3-4 years' time that their seats are gone, it's over, that they're not going to suddenly have a resurgence, how many do you think are going to come grovelling on their hands and knees to Richard and Nigel saying, I've always thought my ideology was with you. I always thought I was the Brexit. I've always been a backbench. I never liked what they were doing. I did everything I could in the Conservative Party. And they're going to come begging and scraping and pleading so they can keep their precious seats.
Well, I mean, I think the Reform Party leadership would consider that a nice problem to have. And I'm sure you're absolutely right. But, a bit of this did happen last time round, and those MPs that actually, Tory MPs, that actually had the courage to do it well before anyone else was considering it, have come out very well out of it, haven't they? I mean, Lee Anderson is in a brilliant position now. Whereas he would not have been at all before. It takes courage to do that. But I just think the Tory party is dying. I will never forget the kind of superior, condescending attitude, in the long period where Reform was struggling to make progress. We had no money, the party had no money, and was just kind of, bumping along at around 7 points in the polls. my Tory friends, and I do have some, were just so patronising. They were so, oh, you'll never get anywhere. Nice little project there of Richard Tice's, nice little indulgence there, but he's never going to get anywhere. We're the greatest party on earth. We're never going to be pushed aside. So I have to say, it would give me, as a not impartial observer on this, because my partner was running the Reform Party at the time, it would give me great pleasure to see some of those people be proven wrong.
Oh, me too. Me too. Let's talk now about the IMF and blimmin' Rachel Reeves.
You love a bit of IMF, don't you? I mean, when you say those words, my heart just sinks.
I know. It's kind of like the sort of supranational version of MDF, that rubbish would-be wood that people used to peddle about in the 90s with those black desks. But the IMF, for what they're worth, they're utterly useless. They get everything wrong. But Rachel Reeves has gone over to Washington, D.C. to go and make friends there, probably because she might need a bailout from them at some point. What I found astonishing was even the BBC was saying, well, it's because of all of Trump's tariffs that the UK economy is in a mess. The IMF were like, no, it's because of your domestic politics. You guys are absolutely nutso. And yet, so much of the legacy media doesn't talk about the state of the economy and how crippled it is, even when we haven't even got the sting in the tail yet from the employers' national insurance, which is about, well, it has landed and is going to get much, much, much worse. Energy bills likely going to go up and up again. I don't think we're even anywhere close to how terrible it's going to be. And yet everyone sort of just takes these photos of Rachel Reeves walking in the breeze in DC with her Lego hair flowing behind her, looking smug in her little jacket. I'm all about growth. I believe in global trade. I want trade to be open. Aren't I brilliant? It's like you're an absolute blibbing moron who's going to completely total the Treasury.
Yeah. I think you're right about most of that stuff. This is a chancellor that right from the start harped on and on and on about growth being at the heart of her agenda, and proceeded to introduce even more punitive taxes on the highest tax burden in 70 years. There's been an absolute exodus of wealth and talent from our country, and that should seriously worry everybody. The left are like, never mind, rich people leaving, we don't care, good riddance. Who's going to pay for all your stuff, by the way? Because the top 1% pay something incredible, like a third of all taxes, about 29%, I think. So, the exodus, the hemorrhaging of millionaires and multimillionaires from our country is not something to be celebrated. Unless you're a very, very stupid lefty, you ought to be able to see that what that's going to result in ultimately, and pretty quickly actually, is a lower tax take. But I think equally worrying, it's not just the departure of the rich. It is actually all the young people, the people in their 20s who are just deciding, you know what, I'm looking at Rachel Reeves's mad socialist Britain and I'm getting the hell out, because I'm going to have a better, my young days of building my career are going to be better off somewhere else where I'm not being hammered every which way I turn by the tax man.
Do you know, I remember studying the Russian Revolution when I was doing GCSE history, and there were tales of the winters after collectivism was brought in, and people had such terrible famine that they were body snatching the corpses of people who had starved to death from the street just to boil them up in the dirty water they had access to. And that might sound kind of dramatic, but believe you me, most of Labour's plans for this country, the horrible, grotesque attitude towards farming and agriculture, the horrible, grotesque attitude towards entrepreneurialism, when all of this stuff really takes roost, we're only really you're not even a year into this yet. We've got 4 more to go. We're not even a quarter of the way into the nightmare. And a lot of the things that they've managed to push through Parliament have yet to actually really hit and impact. When they do, I have no doubt. I mean, Ed Miliband talking about pouring cement down the old sort of gas wells I mean, great. If he wants to do that and cut off any ability to be self-sufficient in energy, if they want to completely trash farms, sell them to housing developers, or worse still, cover them in solar panels so we can't grow our own food, and then someone like Putin or someone like the mad Ayatollah of Iran decide they're going to really mess up shipping routes, which they love doing in the Strait of Hormuz, and they love doing it in the Red Sea and the Black Sea. We've seen that's been a huge part of geopolitics lately. We're going to be absolutely screwed. We're going to be screwed. We're going to have no fuel. We're going to have no food. And when we come to that point, can you imagine the social disorder and the looting that's going to take place? I know I sound apocalyptic, but I don't know about you, but I genuinely think that this is a real potential.
I think things are disintegrating already. I think they're disintegrating so much faster than I ever anticipated. You know, people used to say to me couple of years ago, you know, we could already see the disintegration of our country post-pandemic in so many ways, whether it's the utterly bloated welfare state and the extraordinary number of perfectly physically able people who choose not to work. You know, on so many levels, we see disintegration, the abuse of the welfare state. You know, the complete failure to control our borders. On and on. We could make a long list. People said to me it's going to get bad really quickly, and I don't think I really knew what they meant, but now I really do know what they mean. And you see snapshots of it every day. Just look at the bins piling up in Birmingham, look at the behavior on our streets, look at the filth, the lawlessness, the open law breaking, drug taking, the rest of it. You know, yeah, I know when maybe we sound apocalyptic, I see it. I see it every time I'm in London. And when I go up north or wherever it's important that we all go to lots of different settings. I see different versions of it. It's terrifying.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it really is terrifying. Talking about terrifying, what is going to go on in Ukraine? Can there be any sort of agreement? What does it mean if there isn't one? We're going to be discussing that after this.
Prime Minister's effectively done is ceded a lot of ground already to extremists, because he's saying, oh, they've somehow claimed the identity of England, of St George, of the flag, and we need to get it back. But this curious and extremely irritating sense about what the Prime Minister's doing, it's like somebody who's just discovered a television series that you've been watching for years and is now lecturing you on how brilliant it is.
Yes.
And you think, I know, I was there. And I think it's a very odd way of putting it. It's fairly nakedly political.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. Right, let's now focus our attention on matters Ukraine, because it's been a bit quiet in the news lately. We know there was a sort of ceasefire over Easter, except it didn't seem to be upheld by Putin. Trump said he's going to sort this in 24 hours. Well, it's been quite a while, Donald, and nothing is anywhere near resolution just yet. But it seems to me that Russia are now starting to show some of their cards, and one of their demands is that the US must recognise that Crimea is Russian. Of course, what happened in 2014 when Crimea was annexed is Barack Obama did jack all about it. It was just kind of ignored. But then the international community, or most of it, led by the US, has never actually said, OK, that's now part of Russia. And that is what Russia wants to see happen. Ukraine, understandably, have said, not on your Nelly. Isabel, what are your thoughts on all of this? I mean, it seems to me this whole idea there's a coalition of the willing in Europe. They couldn't even organise a proverbial in a brewery. America said we're going to solve this and then kind of haven't, and don't seem to have the answers, at least not yet. Where do you see this all going?
Well, I'm amazed that you bring up the coalition of the willing, because I haven't heard Keir Starmer talking about it for quite a while, have you? And that's
right,
because there isn't a coalition of the willing. I mean, this was always a complete fiction. It was just a phrase that he came up with, hoping for his having a good war moment as an embattled prime minister. They all try and do it. David Cameron tried to do it in Libya. I mean, they all want something like this. And Keir Starmer tried to create that moment for himself. It sort of worked a little bit, although it didn't actually have as much of a positive impact in the polls as I thought it might, mainly because it was just, I suspect people saw it as a bit phony and probably wasn't going anywhere. So there isn't really a coalition of the willing. I was a bit concerned, and people will have different views on this, particularly amongst our listeners, but I was concerned at the idea that part of any peace deal should involve Ukraine being banned from ever joining NATO. I personally, you might disagree with this, I don't really see why that should be on the cards. Why shouldn't they have the ability to join NATO? NATO is a defensive organisation, and if Russia doesn't have any malign plans, then it ought not to have any fear of Ukraine being part of NATO. But, you know, I know others will strongly disagree with that. They will go on about how that would be very provocative and so on. Personally, I'm not buying that. You know, there are an awful lot of countries that are members of NATO, and it's not a provocative act to be that.
Yeah, I mean, my focus is entirely on, this doesn't surprise me that one of Russia's demands is Crimea to be recognised as Russian, because Russia's plan all along has been about gaining leverage on access to resources and access to maritime routes. It's why they want all of that region to the east, because it's got brilliant gas fields and mineral reserves and all the cool stuff that is brilliant on the international market. But let's not forget as well the games that Putin played with the Black Sea and shipping coming out of Odessa. where he actually put a strangle on fertilizer coming out of Ukraine. 70% of the world's wheat supplies come out of the Ukraine. It put up food prices and triggered global inflation, as did, of course, all the restrictions on access to gas and oil. And if he gets to control that southern coastline, which is currently Ukraine, he gets to mess about and play silly buggers, quite frankly, with the entire global economy. I just don't know where Trump is at in all of this. I don't know whether, you know, he hasn't paid any lip service really to saying to Russia, you've got to get back in your box, or, you know, this is what I'm going to do. He sort of had sort of mealy-mouthed threats towards them. But we actually, my opinion here, people go, oh, it's a foreign war, why are we doing this? No, at the end of the day, you cannot have Russia controlling the Black Sea, you cannot have Iran controlling the Red Sea, and then China controlling the Pacific. You let that axis of evil control the maritime routes, and you will soon deeply regret it. And my concern is, I'm just not sure Trump's going to step up to the plate. Yeah,
I agree. There was, I think you and I are probably both thinking of the same moment where very fleetingly the president said something about, you know, well, Russia's going to have to make some concessions, otherwise they'll have a hell of a price to pay. He said something like that, and that was it. It was just a little, you know, it was a fleeting thing, wasn't it? And he didn't return to that rhetoric at all. His handling of this, to me, has seemed extremely one-sided. No one's going to forget for a very long time that awful scene in the Oval Office with Zelensky. People will have differing views on the rights and wrongs overall on the war, but there was not an equivalent treatment of Putin. And I think personally, politically, it would have been much smarter to be seen to be being pretty tough on both sides, and he hasn't done that. That's just my view. A lot will disagree with me, I'm sure.
So where do we go from here? You've only got about a minute to tell me, a bit more than that, but what is the future? What can be done at this point?
Well, I'm afraid that Ukraine will have to cede territory. I hate that. I really do hate that. It absolutely sticks in the throat, doesn't it? But I don't see that this is going to end without that happening. I think Trump's going to force that on Ukraine one way or another. And there may be a sort of uneasy, we'll agree to disagree for a very long time. It won't be any formal, happy peace deal. It will be a kind of permanent ceasefire. It's not a happy outcome.
No, it's not a happy outcome at all. I just have a feeling that no one's got an idea, no one's got a solution. And so what they hope is it just doesn't get worse, or Russia doesn't make any more progress. And if things could just sort of, even if they're not good, but just stay as they are and not be exacerbated, that might be the best possible thing. Oh, Isabel, I don't know. We live in very troublesome times. It's been fantastic having you on the programme. The wonderful Isabel Oakeshott, Talk's international editor. Right, I'm going to take a short break now, but there's still 2 more hours of moaning and whining and shouting and ranting to come. Why would you tune out? I'm going to be joined by Deputy Political Editor of The Sun, Ryan Sabey, to talk all things politics after this. I'll see you in just a mo.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome to the show. Alex Phillips sitting in for the inimitable Kevin O'Sullivan until 10 o'clock. We've had a lively old debate in the first hour. I kind of feel like this whole week it's been a little bit spicy. I don't know what's gotten into me. I've clearly put something on my cornflakes this week. I'll tell you what it is. Quite frankly, I've just had enough. I've actually seen now, looming large, the horrible future that lies ahead of us unless we actually grow up, man up, stand up and fight for this country. And so I'll tell you what, of my dying breath, I am going to do just that. As much as I would like to pack my bags and go to sunnier climes where there might be some sort of hope of sanity or prosperity, this is my nation. And it's my job to make sure that there's something left over for future generations, although it's looking pretty bleak. Right, I'm going to do some of your messages and take a call in a minute, but if you want to throw in your 2-bit, the number is 03444991000. You can use that number to send me a WhatsApp message or leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. 87222 is the number to send me a text message. You must write the word talk before your message. We're on X at talkTV. Let's do a couple of messages before I then throw to the phone lines. Margaret in Birmingham says lots of listeners have chosen Isabel and I to be the ideal guests at St George's Tea Party. Really? Well, that's until I open the cider and then it's all going to be hullabaloo. And she says, who would be my guest? Like I've already said, obviously I'd have my man Nigel over because he is basically St George these days, isn't he? Well, yeah, Isabel's great company. She can clear up a few glasses of wine. Maybe I'll have Jeremy Kyle, as he asked me just before the break. Mike Grep. To be honest, I'd actually have pretty much everybody at Talk. Everyone's a really good laugh. Actually going out for a lunch and a few vats of wine with JHB this weekend. Cannot wait. Off screen, she's an absolute pussycat and a gossip. She's brilliant. Although don't cross her on screen, you know what I mean? Howard near Edinburgh says, I feel that this ongoing conflict in Ukraine, initiated by Putin, has been downgraded news-wise. What happened to the big boys fighting for democracy? Trump has shown his true colours and might as well invite Putin to dinner and decide between them what they want to do, because the way Zelensky was treated in the White House by those bullies just shows the world that Trump is not fit to clean former Foreign Minister Henry Kissinger's shoes. Do you know, so always a divisive issue on this channel, the whole Ukraine thing. There's a lot of people going, no, it's not. At the end of the day, Putin is a wrong-un, right? He's a wrong-un. You know, whatever one thinks of Zelensky and Ukraine and, you know, if it's corrupt or not corrupt, it was a corrupt country. It still is a corrupt country. But the point is, Putin's a wrong-un, and what he wants to do is get a stranglehold over global resources and the global economy, and he is in bed with some pretty grim characters, and always has been. That's it. Lisa in London says, I've not heard anyone say what's obvious. Sir Keir Starmer and his clowns don't give a stuff about the trans vote. It's minuscule and therefore irrelevant. True. However, they do care about the lefties, the Greens and the unions that support them, and that's the vote they can't afford to lose. That is why they back this group, and that's the reason for their nonsense. You're right. It's sick and sad, isn't it? The way that they would just throw the security and integrity of women under the bus because they've got some sort of hard leftists, some malign Marxists in their midst who need to prop up their power. Paul from Dorset says, Happy St George's Day, Alex. Technically, it isn't. I mean, I know it normally is today every year, but apparently there's some rule in Christianity that means if it's just been Easter, you can't have a Saint's Day for another week. So the church put St George's Day back to the 28th. So we're not actually celebrating St George's Day today. Factoid. It's a great start to Wednesday evening to hear you and Isabel highlight common sense. Pity Sir Keir refused to apologise to women after acknowledging the Supreme Court. That man doesn't even know the word sorry. And you know what? Like I said, I'm done with this whole, are you going to apologise? Are you going to apologise? It's this sort of lazy trope that legacy media journalists who don't know their topic, have got no nous about politics, they just use it to try and get some sort of, you know, come up out of their guests because they haven't got any sensible or pertinent question to ask. Do you think you should apologise? Are you going to make them resign? No, an apology won't go far enough. No, not for me. I want every single person who have actively partaken in creating this gender crisis amongst children, and anyone who has actively partaken in encouraging kids to mutilate their bodies when they can't even get a tattoo or have a mortgage or drive a car or drink alcohol. I think anybody who took part in that should be imprisoned. I do. I'm sorry, but I do. Because if you're not going to safeguard kids, if you're not going to protect their dignity and their security and allow weirdos to play games with their minds, you are a bit wrong in the head. Now, I want to go to a message here, which I think is very important to read. From Michelle. Alex, please don't describe all trans women as perverts and evil. It's simply not the case. You are absolutely right. My adult son came out to me as a trans woman last year. She's the sweetest, most gentlest person I know, would never hurt anyone. She has gender dysphoria. It's not a fad. It was a shock at first, but she's been so brave in opening up, and to see her happy is all a mum can want. She just wants to be accepted and live her life quietly. Please don't make her life harder than it already is. You are right, Michelle, okay? But the problem is this, and I said this yesterday for anyone listening to the show, there are people with genuine gender dysphoria, and it's a really serious psychological condition that people really struggle with. And we must do everything we can to show empathy and accommodate them in the same way we would with anybody else with a medical condition. The same way we would if it was somebody who was physically disabled, or, you know, you can go on with the sort of things that people have to tackle, that we need to show compassion and patience and tolerance and love and support. But my problem is the way that there are a lot of young people out there who probably don't have gender dysphoria and have been actively encouraged to believe that they do. And there's also a lot of weird people out there who have ill intentions, who go about wearing a pretty little flock like a schoolgirl in their pigtails with a big beard. I mean, look, you saw that thing, I probably didn't, but on X, there's India Willoughby, who's a prominent trans campaigner, trying to encourage all these people to join this sort of everyone drink as much water as possible so you can urinate everywhere. That's gross. I mean, it's people who do stuff like that. It's people who then try and force men to take part in women's sports. It's people who, you know, men who want to sleep in the tents of brownie guides and say, but I now identify as a woman. It's rapists who want to go into women's prisons. And all the people who can't see that there's a distinction between those awful people and people with a genuine medical condition. People who have hijacked this and then have turned it into a really bitter, toxic, vitriolic debate, which at the end of the day has turned people with gender dysphoria into a piece of rope in a really nasty tug of war. Those are the people that I just have no time for whatsoever. Right, OK, let's go now to Ryan Sabey, Deputy Political Editor of The Sun. Ryan, I'm really pleased to say you're joining me right now. How are you doing, my darling?
Well, Brian, hi, Alex.
Hiya. Recess is over. You're hard at it again. PMQs today. What were your sort of headlines, really, from Prime Minister's questions?
I thought the main thing, really, was the fact that I thought Kemi Badenoch had one of her best Prime Minister's questions that she'd had since becoming leader last November. I think this was followed up after that quite good performance from her yesterday in the House of Commons. So she's had two bites of the cherry on this, and I would say that she's done pretty well. Now, it's always difficult for a leader of the opposition to cut through, to make waves with the public, especially when you're a party leader, when your party has pretty much been decimated at the last election. And I think that she did okay in the scheme of things. And I think one thing that you just want to do as leader of the opposition is put the Prime Minister of the day on the back foot. And I think she'll be happy, and I think her team will be happy with how she did today and yesterday.
Yeah, it's very much her comfort zone, isn't it? The sort of these arguments. She's always been quite clear and strong on it. I think in many respects, when she was, what was she? Equalities Minister, Culture Minister? I can't remember now.
Policies, women's and equalities minister.
That's right. It was very much her sort of, it was very much her bread and butter, and she's actually been a strong voice in this. Part of the reason she's sort of catapulted to success to prominence, I would say. Very much her wheelhouse. Let's talk about the economy, because Rachel Reeves went over to Washington, D.C., various pictures are in the newspaper, striding confidently, hair blowing behind her. I'm all for open global trade, as if she's some brilliant revolutionary who's going to save not just Britain, but the whole of the West. And then the IMF turn around and go, do you know what? We're going to slash your growth forecast because it's rubbish. And she says, well, it's because of Trump, isn't it? Oh, of course it's Trump. It's all Trump's tariffs. And they went, no, mate. It's because of you. It's because of your budget. It's because of the energy bills in your country. I mean, she's got to go at some point, but I keep hearing that Starmer's not going to get rid of her.
I think it'll be very, very difficult to get rid of Rachel Reeves. I think one of the main reasons for that is that the Prime Minister of the day has gone through opposition those 4 years as Labour leader, that the hard gruel of politics. Rachel Reeves has been with him every single step of the way. And not only that, they then enter government and they are in lockstep on their decisions. It's very, very difficult for a chancellor to make policy on the hoof. Number 10 will be all over every single policy decision that comes out of the Treasury on tax, spending cuts, borrowing, whatever it may well be. They will know every single last detail, and pretty much as they should. Just looking at what it was between Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. We always heard of the TBGBs, those arguments between the two. These two, their teams tend to get on. You barely hear, you barely hear a crossword between them. And you compare that to the Brown Blair years, they were at each other's throats, and their teams were. And that lasted 10 years before Gordon Brown became Prime Minister. So I think in terms of changing the Chancellor at any point, I just think that's such a long way off, and it's just not on the horizon, on the agenda. I think it has been difficult for Rachel Reeves. She's had to make some very, very difficult decisions early on, and with that IMF forecast, the decisions like the national insurance, sort of domestic policy, will have an impact on our growth forecast. But one of the key elements of that downgrade was the Trump tariffs. So it's going to be difficult for all countries dealing with that. But one of the things that she is trying to do while she's out in Washington is speak to her counterpart Scott Bessent and try and mitigate those trade tariffs, whether it's car, steel, aluminium, general import taxes on British goods heading stateside, and that's her task. She's got a big task to do this week, and maybe set up some kind of deal to be signed in the coming weeks.
I mean, it'd be a bit rich coming from a party that bleated on about, chlorinated chicken and wanting to be back in the customs union, because it's quite clear to me that one thing Donald Trump wants to exercise is in this sort of tug of war over the UK. Are you European? Are you Atlanticist? Well, thank you very much. We're in the middle and we're happy to provide a bridge to both. I don't think Trump is particularly happy with that. I think he wants to extricate the UK from the orbit of the EU. And I think that's going to be a very difficult thing, a very difficult equilibrium for Sir Keir Starmer to navigate. I mean, which way do you see him going? It seems to me right now they're sort of already talking quite enthusiastically about importing American this and that. They're desperate to get some sort of a trade deal over the line. But I can't see Trump, when it seems to me he's using these tariffs for a geopolitical agenda, making life too easy.
Yeah, Keir Starmer has got, I wouldn't say he's got difficult choices, but he's got sort of a difficult dilemma in front of him in the sort of coming weeks and months. Now, he says that he doesn't have a choice to make because he can be, and he uses this term quite a lot, the bridge between America and Europe. Now, I think one thing that he does have to be careful of is signing away maybe too many rights to Europe, maybe signing away, signing up to too close a deal with America, and just sort of boxing himself in a little bit when it comes to trade arrangements. Because one thing the government is trying to do as well is try and strike trade deals all over the world, whether it's a trade deal with India or maybe an improved trade deal with Australia, or whatever it may well be. So I think he's just got to be very, very careful. It's just, for any prime minister, and particularly in this case, it's, walking that tightrope. Then he's got the added problem, and the Chancellor has mentioned this in the last day or so, is of the issue with China. And she said at the weekend it would be foolish to sever ties with China and the Chinese economy. As much as, Conservative MPs, want, the government to pull away from China, our economy is pretty, entwined with the Chinese economy in terms of goods, trade, all this kind of thing. So just to pull yourself away is very, very difficult. So it's a game of 3 or even 4-dimensional chess for Sir Keir Starmer. America, Europe, China, the rest of the world is, it is difficult, but he's there. He's been elected to do that, so he's got to make those choices.
Yeah, you sort of read my mind bringing China into this, because that's what I was going to ask you, because we're talking about Trump levelling tariffs for geopolitical clout. His focus, it's partly on the EU, but actually his main focus is on trying to alienate and ostracise China and encourage countries to pick a side. You do trade with them or you do trade with us. And as you said, Rachel Reeves, one of her first visits was hopping on a plane going over to Beijing. I don't know how many air miles the cabinet have done between here and Xi Jinping's government. Quite a lot, I dare say. So quite convenient now that apparently Ed Miliband's turning around saying, well, we better not buy our solar panels from China anymore because of forced labour. Well, China's been using forced labour for decades. Everybody knows about it. It's never been particularly hidden, as much as China denies it. I mean, do you smell a rat here? Because they're so desperate to push their net zero fanaticism that they need those solar panels, they need those windmills. Where else are they going to get them? Yeah,
now this ban that comes in for solar panels from Chinese slaves applies to the Great British Energy. Now it'd be interesting to see what the government do when it comes to other public authorities, whether there's any sort of restrictions that come to other British companies, other British firms, when it comes to actually purchasing this, because the government has set out on a big stall to try and actually get solar panels onto schools, on hospitals. Well, a lot of them do come from China, so it's going to be really difficult to sort of get to that level if we're not importing them from China. But I think one of the reasons that this government and Ed Miliband on this particular point pulled back was because the outcry from dozens and dozens of Labour MPs when it came to making that decision. And you don't sometimes, governments obviously put down amendments to laws, when laws are going through Parliament, and they've heard this outcry from those Labour MPs, and they've put down this amendment to put this ban on solar panels coming from being made by Chinese slaves and coming here. Just because of that outcry. So I think that disquiet amongst Labour MPs has made them change their minds. And I think that Ed Miliband has just seen which way the wind is blowing on this, and just thought it probably wasn't worth wasting much more political capital on this. So, that's the decision that seems to have been made in the last 24, 36 hours or so.
Yeah, I mean, the right decision to have been made. I think we should be a lot stronger on China personally. It's very clear that, especially in Xinjiang, they're using the most horrible sorts of forced labour. I was doing my reading up on this, actually, this morning, reading reports in Amnesty International of quite what they do. It's dark. We're not just talking about, you go on a production line and you have to work 18 hours. No. There's starvation, there's torture, there's segregation, there's sort of, actually psychologically beating people into, chanting mantras about the Communist Party. It's really unpleasant stuff. Right, Ryan, stay with us, because you're going to talk to us after the break about even more politics. And I'm really enthusiastic to pick your brain about this sort of leaked recording of Robert Jenrick saying, don't worry, I'm going to get a deal with reform. So don't leave the audience in suspense for too long. We're going to hear from you again just after this.
Prime Minister's effectively done is ceded a lot of ground already to extremists, because he's saying, oh, they've somehow claimed the identity of England, of St George, of the flag, and we need to get it back. But this curious and extremely irritating sense about what the Prime Minister's doing, it's like somebody who's just discovered a television series that you've been watching for years and is now lecturing you on how brilliant it is.
Yes.
And you think, I know, I was there. And I think it's a very odd way of putting it. It's fairly nakedly political.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Right, let's catch back up with Ryan Sabey, because there has been a cheeky little leaked recording of Robert Jenrick apparently telling a group of students that he can get a deal done with reform and he can unite the right and therefore block the Labour Party from coming into power. It's a bit early to be talking about the things that might happen in a general election, but if I was a betting woman, I would put a lot of money on the idea that there's going to be no sort of arrangement before the general election. Whether after a general election there might be some sort of coalition to be forged, I don't know. What are you hearing in the corridors of power?
Well, everything I hear from people close to Kemi Badenoch, or even those close to those in reform, at the moment there's no talk of any deal. You've got Kemi Badenoch, who has explicitly ruled that out. Nigel Farage and his team, almost sometimes you feel like they want to destroy the Conservative Party, and I think they've said as much as that in the past. So you kind of feel that it's certainly not on the cards at the moment. But I think one thing is interesting from all these leaked recordings that you do hear is, it's their innermost thoughts. It may not be something they would say in public to the likes, on TV screens or what have you, but this is their sort of their mode of thinking, the way of thinking, the direction of travel. So I think one of the interesting things from Robert Jenrick, he's not looking ahead to the next month, 2-3 months or so. He's kind of looking ahead to the next, 2-3 years. And he can kind of see this playing out. And he was very personal in this audio clip that you hear. He talks about I this, I that. And I think he just sees himself as someone who can come in and pick up the mantle after Kemi Badenoch if that happens. And actually, this is where he would take the Conservative Party. Now, Kemi Badenoch, isn't going anywhere for the moment, but I think the local elections next week are going to be difficult. She's going to be under a lot of pressure, and that pressure is just going to intensify. But I think you speak to any Conservative MP, the last thing they really want to, well, a lot of them want to do, is hold another leadership election. So particularly just at the moment, I mean, I think it would be, political suicide to do it. I mean, she was only elected last November, and I think they all, in the main, want to see, to give her a bit of a fighting chance. And then, if things don't go well after local elections next year, when you combine that with the Scottish elections and the Welsh elections, maybe they can take a rain check. But I think for the moment, I think all bets are off. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But I think they just want to hang in there and hold their fire for the minute.
Yeah, I mean, they seem to have blimmin' leadership elections more often than I have hot dinners. But, it's interesting, actually, that Sir Keir Starmer alluded to a change at the top of the Conservative Party in PMQs today. But from what I'm hearing from people I know in the Conservative Party, is if there was going to be a change of leader, despite the fact that Jenrick is keen as mustard and clearly is fighting for that job, I think that seems very obvious, and I think a lot of people think he's teed up for it. What I'm hearing is when it comes to the powers that be in that party who still have a stranglehold over the way it functions behind the scenes, he wouldn't be their pick. he's not in their team, that it'd be more likely to go to Cleverly. Is that what you're hearing?
Yeah. I think that's one of the things you do here, and I think that might be an area which could hurt the Conservatives as well, because I think you could then see maybe Robert Jenrick or maybe allies of him peel off to Reform, and you could sort of see a centre-right or sort of a right coalition that way. But the smart money was, going into that leadership election, nearly the last hurdle, James Cleverly was the favourite. He had the most votes, and it was only because his team couldn't count the votes that he didn't get through to the final two. They got complacent, and he didn't make it in the end. But it was his for the takings. You just wonder, and I think also the thing is with all these leadership contests, if you look too keen, you look too desperate, sometimes it just doesn't quite fall for you. So Robert Jenrick can do all the groundwork he needs, but he needs to win over not only the parliamentary party, but he needs to win over the broader Conservative Party as well. Those people who actually vote. So, but I think we're a long way off. I mean, the planning is clearly going on behind the scenes, but perhaps just hold our horses for now.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? There's something very uniquely Conservative about the sort of plotting and the factions, and we've all got to have the groups, the ERG, the Northern Research Group, the this, the One Nations, the that, the rolling out Sir Graham Brady from the stationery cupboard again to hand out envelopes and then count them. They're obsessed with it. I've never known anything like it. They're obsessed with it. They spend more time plotting and trying to forge little alliances and having WhatsApp groups than they do actually focusing on the politics. And yet, all these divisions in the Labour Party, which should be apparent right now over the trans stuff, over net zero, over all these sort of, over the economy. And Sir Keir Starmer is still seemingly, despite having a massive, sprawling party, able to hold it together cohesively. Is that just a mirage, though?
I think one of the things is when you've been out of power for so long, you've been out of power for 14 years, it's probably slightly easier to hold your, despite it being, the Labour Party, there are lots of factions, you can hold it all together. His ministerial team are holding it together. There's lots of people who are on their best behaviour because they want one of those jobs. So I think it's easy. I think the trouble is when you are a party leader or prime minister, you get into 2 or 3 years down the line, people are overlooked for a job. That's when you start to find out who the real troublemakers are. So he is holding it together. He's made some difficult and unpopular decisions, where it's winter fuel allowance, removing the universal nature of that, or national insurance. They've been deeply, deeply unpopular. But he seems to be, he's still there, and there's no talk of anyone getting rid of Keir Starmer. They're all very much his team seems to be behind him. So look, I think for Keir, he's got a few years to go and make a fist of it. People have just elected him. He's got a massive majority, but he will be judged on whether he makes the most of that majority. Boris Johnson had an 80-seat majority. That seemed to be squandered very, very quickly. Keir's got double that. Let's just see what he does with it, and they can judge. But it seems like the opinion polls and the public aren't warming to the Labour Party that much at the moment. I mean, it's pretty much a 3-4-way split when you look at those.
Yeah, they're not in dire straits, though, considering it's the incumbent government in a particularly sort of, difficult period of British history. I actually think they're holding up better than I'd have expected, frankly.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, there's trouble on the home front. There's trouble when it comes to stuff overseas. They're being dealt this curveball called Donald Trump, who, it's not just, journalists like me who are waking up most mornings to hear the words Donald Trump last night said, and you think, what has he said now? It's people in Downing Street who can't second guess what he's going to do. The channels of communication probably aren't what they were, because he's making decisions almost on a whim. So it's very difficult for them to second guess. They can, we say in Westminster, they try and war game all these policy decisions and what he's going to come up with. But sometimes when you're dealing with someone like Donald Trump and the unknown, it's difficult. And that's why Keir Starmer and his team have got to be on their toes 24/7.
Indeed they do, and so they should be. They are in charge of something very important, which is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Ryan Sabey, thank you ever so much. We're going to take a short break, but when I come back from the break, I'm going to be reading some of your messages, and if you feel so inclined as to talk to me, that'd be rather lovely. It's only me, little old me. I don't bite. I'm too far away. I'm in this little studio all by myself. I can't hurt you. In fact, I'll probably enjoy it, and you'll enjoy it. So this is the number, 03444991000, standard network rate. Same number for WhatsApp, 87222 to text. Remember to write the word talk before you message. I'm back after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back to the show. It's the time of the show that I like to open up the phone lines and listen to the voice notes and read the messages of you, my darling listeners and viewers. So let's start off with a voice note, shall we? This is Jan.
Hi Alex, I was driving my 10-year-old daughter to school yesterday with Mike Graham on, and she said, it's really simple, a woman can't have a penis. She said, do what you want, just stay out of our toilets, stay out of our dressing rooms, and don't play our sports. I think she could run this country better than Two-Tier and his merry band of Muppets.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's so blimmin' obvious that a child knows what a man is and what a woman is. But it's not infantile behaviour, is it? It's so dangerous, it's so toxic, it's such a red flag for where we've got to as a society, the fact that we've even had to have this debate and it's had to go to the highest court in the land. It's disgraceful. Let's speak now to Joan, who's in Sunderland. Hi there, Joan, my darling.
Hello. First of all, I would like to agree with everything you've said about everything so far. You're a woman after my own heart.
Oh, Jane,
I was beginning to think we were a rare breed.
Well, we still are a rare breed.
But I agree especially about schools. I am so fed up about the rubbish that have been fed into our young people and the untold damage that they're doing to our children's minds. We are going to reap the whirlwind in the future. And another thing that has really got to me, I'm 84-year-old, and I have never heard... Hello?
Yeah, no, we're listening. I was listening intently. You left us all in suspense. What have you never heard, Joan?
I'm 84-year-old, and I've never heard such rubbish when a 3-year-old child can be excluded from a nursery school for something it has said. Those people should hang their heads in shame.
Yeah. Oh, it's bullying. It's weird. I don't know what it is, Joan. And how did we get here? You talk about we're going to reap the whirlwind when it comes to kids in school. Now, we already are, right? Because I was thinking the other day, once upon a time, oddballs in society today, young people who felt a little bit sort of on the fringes or weren't sort of, you know, running with the cool kids or the in crowd or just a little bit different, tended to be goths and things like that. Now they're all sort of, you know, transgender people who like hardcore socialism and think Gaza's a brilliant place and that Hamas are some sort of heroes. And you think, how did they get so divorced from reality? And I tell you what I think it is, Joan, because we're finally seeing in the young people today, you know, sort of up to the mid-20s, people who have been brought up entirely on a diet of social media, of internet, of smartphones. When I was a kid growing up, we still went out and grazed our knees and climbed trees and rode bicycles. In fact, we didn't have internet in my house, in my parents' house, till I was about 15 or something. Even then, it was sort of that weird dial-up kind. And all you could really do was send a message. Even when I was at university, there wasn't really internet. You could send an email to the library and that was about it. So I managed to have what, you know, for all intents and purposes, was a very normal childhood. And what we're seeing now finally is a generation of people who didn't have normal parenting, who didn't go out and play in the fields and fall out or, you know, run around and play tag and have disputes and, you know, then work together as a team to problem solve. And they didn't do all the things that are needed to turn young minds into adults, to learn life skills. And I think this is why we're seeing such a huge uptick in ideological extremism in younger generations, fear of socialising, of going out, of talking on the phone, of making real human relationships. And as a result, a huge uptick in mental illness. I think we've already reached the whirlwind. Joan, thank you very much. It's lovely having a Macam on the show. Right, let's speak to Jason, who's in Sheffield. Hi there, Jason.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm all right, my darling. How are you?
Yeah, what I'd like to say is that why is it that you never hear of trans men? It's always trans women. Is that because the men are... Look, I'm going to have to say it. Whether it's allowed or not, I don't know.
Oh, we're going to find out, aren't we? I might have to apologise it, and my producer's ready with a thing on the big red button that goes, but, you know, you say it anyway and we'll see what happens.
But I'll say it, and it's not that bad, to be honest, but it's... if you're a geezer and you want to put on a dress and it gets you off on one, you never see a woman put on men's clothes and get off on one, dear.
Right, you're right about this, basically. It's what I've always said. So one of my really good friends, James, is actually a trans man, so to speak. She was born a girl and now goes by the name of James. Amazing. And just doesn't get involved with any of this stuff. Just doesn't care. Not interested.
It's only the men transitioning
and it's
to women.
But it's not the men with genuine gender dysphoria, I don't think. It's weird men for whom this is all a fetish, okay? They're the ones...
It is a fetish.
Yeah, they're the ones who want to go about and get into classrooms and wear dresses and be in toilets. And, you know, I've said this before, the autogynophiles is the term. But I remember when this protest first happened outside the European Parliament when I was an MEP, and all these trans men turned up with bottles of their own urine to like throw about the place, and one of the trans activists was asking all the trans protesters to do this again. I'm sorry, but if that's not part of the Venn diagram of you dirty, nasty person, then what is? And that is not to say, we had a wonderful message earlier from Michelle, who's got a trans son, and says, you know, his life, her life, sorry, doesn't need to be made any more difficult. But the problem is, what should have been a grassroots campaign to help people who require compassion and understanding has been hijacked from the top by a load of people who have been making demands and courting attention. And you just, it's very easy to see the psychology of these people when you look at the sort of signs they carry, willing death on people who want to make sure women's spaces are for women only. The things that they're demanding wasn't just, we want to make sure that there's a unisex toilet that we can use. That would be a normal demand. No, it's all about, I want to be able to call myself a woman, even without having surgery, without doing anything at all. Even if I look like a big bearded brute, I want to go into the women's changing rooms because I say I'm a woman. This wasn't about compassion and empathy for those people. This was essentially trolling us. This was taking the proverbial so they, like you said, could get up to satiating all of their desires that most of us don't think ought to be satiated at our expense. So I'm glad you brought that up, Jason, and I think someone does have to say it. We live in a country of free speech. I don't care if the Rozzers come knock on my door. Come after me. I'm not going to my own timidity or my own cowardice to allow women and girls to be threatened by men with perversions. Okay? It's that simple. I'm not going to stand there and go, it's okay, I'm not going to say it, I'm going to leave that job up to somebody else. I think women and girls in this country are worth more than that. And I think any civilised nation stands up for the protection of women and girls. If you're not doing that, if you're not looking after women and girls, then you're basically a mad Muslim caliphate, aren't you? We're better than that in Britain, and it's true. It's true. This isn't saying all trans people are perverts. Absolutely not. But there's a big subset of people who have hijacked the campaign because they are, right? That is just a fact. And you can look at the posts, you can look at the protests, you can look at this hashtag, whatever. I'm going to find out what it is during the advert break, something to do with peeing. And that answers the question for you. I shouldn't have to say it. It's blooming obvious. It's been obvious for 5 years, which is why it's even more mind-boggling and sick that politicians went along with it. Oh, Jason, my darling, thank you ever so much for your call. Right, so we're going to take an advert break now. When we come back, one of my favourites, commentator from the New Culture Forum, Amy Gallagher, is going to be joining us. She's going to have a lot to say on what we've just been talking about. And I'm going to ask her about all the other woke wars we're still embroiled in. That's coming up after this.
the Prime Minister's effectively done is ceded a lot of ground already to extremists, because he's saying, oh, they've somehow claimed the identity of England, of St George, of the flag, and we need to get it back. But this curious and extremely irritating sense about what the Prime Minister's doing, it's like somebody who's just discovered a television series that you've been watching for years and is now lecturing you on how brilliant it is.
Yes.
And you think, I know, I was there. And I think it's a very odd way of putting it. It's fairly nakedly political.
Competition's a good thing, and the Tories have had their chance. They had 14 years to turn the country around and make it grow again and great again, and they did the opposite. And so people won't forgive and they won't forget. That's why we're surging in the polls. That's why we are in almost every poll now ahead of the Tories, very often by more than the margin of error. And so we will just keep doing what we seem to be doing pretty well. And obviously we're looking forward to the results coming through on May the 2nd.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Delighted to say I'm joined by Amy Gallagher, who's a commentator from the New Culture Forum, but also, importantly, a whistleblower from those dastardly Frankenstein hospitals, the gender clinics. Amy, we haven't caught up since the Supreme Court ruling. I don't want to hear your reaction to that, so to speak, because we've covered that ground. But what have you made of the fallout from all of this? The fact that it seems to me, even though you've got the Labour Party going, oh, this has provided clarity, there's certainly large cohorts within the government who want to do what they can to mitigate or dilute this legislation as much as possible.
Well, there's absolutely no apologies as far as I can see. And so many people for years were bullied and hounded out of their jobs. So many people had to fight tooth and nail for this judgment. And now they're just kind of updating their system. Like they don't care anything about the truth. They don't care about women. They don't care about what's been happening to so many women up and down the country. They've just said, oh, OK, you know, we've got this ruling. We're just going to change gears now. And it's unbelievable. And you do think it's something as essential as what sex is. If they can just change gears so quickly, you think, well, what else are they doing that on? We know how else do they internally, you know, judge what's true or what's good? You just think, are these people just robots? Essentially, it's really worrying to see. And good on Kemi Badenoch for pushing back. And she was actually one who did speak up and did meet with Keira Bell and did challenge the Tavistock. So she is the one that should be, you know, speaking up. So good for her. But I mean, the fact that there just hasn't been any apology is just, I mean, it's very disrespectful to all of the women who've, you know, had damage done to their bodies, or have had damage done to their bodies of their loved ones, or have lost their jobs, or who received horrendous bullying. And Keir Starmer just doesn't care.
Yeah, and it seems to me as well now that in the wake of this, the vitriol and the nastiness from the pro-trans lobby is really revealing itself more. I mean, it's always been vitriolic and nasty, but some of the behaviour has been utterly unedifying lately. Not just graffiti on, you know, things like the Millicent Fawcett statue from the suffragette movement, but some of these sort of hashtags going around, some of the posters they're carrying. What is wrong with these people?
It shows their open misogyny, their open hatred of women. Some of them are openly calling for, you know, TERFs or people like J.K. Rowling to be killed. These are highly deranged people, and the irony is they're doing things like urinating in public, right. And that just shows how these are men. They're acting like men. Their claim is that they feel like they're a woman, or that their soul is like the soul of a woman, whatever that means. But they're acting in an extremely aggressive and masculine way. Women don't urinate in public, and as Richard Dawkins pointed out, actually male animals will urinate on land to mark their territory. It's an extremely masculine behaviour, and it's also extremely intimidating behaviour, because of course it means that men have to expose themselves. They have to put, pull their pants down, and it's extremely sexualised actually, and intimidating behaviour. So it shows what their real intentions are. Their real intentions are a hatred of women and a desire to want to control them, sexually and in the public square, actually.
Yeah, I mean, there's fetish, there's sexual stimulation and titillation attached to the want to sort of urinate in public. It comes around time and again in these trans protests, the sort of need for sort of golden showers as a demonstration. And it is deeply disturbing. Like I said, the mask is slipping. What do you make of Sir Keir Starmer? Suddenly realises it's St George's Day, although it's actually not. This year it's on the 28th because you're not allowed to Saints' Day within a week of Easter. But there you go. He got that wrong. He never gets anything right. And decided to take a photo with a St George's cross, basically saying, we're going to take back this flag from the far right. Why can't he just let it go? Why couldn't he say something nice about England? Why couldn't he talk about the brilliant achievements of this teeny tiny little country that spread its language all over the world, that brought the world the railway, vaccinations, radio, television, the telephone, the internet, the first computer, the massive things. Little wee England has probably been the most pound for pound influential nation on this planet. Oh, we abolished slavery. He could have said that. That sounds nice and cuddly and left wing and woke. But no. He still has to dog whistle this idea that nationalism is somehow something immoral and evil and dangerous by talking about reclaiming St George's Cross from the far right. I mean, Amy, why can't we just be proud of ourselves?
Well, exactly. I mean, St George's Day is, of course, the one day of the year where Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are forced through gritted teeth to praise England in the English, and he couldn't quite do it, could he? He had to have a dig. He had to bring up that phantom of the far right, like he so often likes to, and say, well, you know, okay, we like the flag, but some people wave it are problematic, and we have to be careful about it. I mean, he doesn't make these criticisms of any other flags. I mean, to me, of all the flags we see in our society, the Palestinian flag being one, and the LGBT transgender flag being another, they are far more problematic than people waving the England flag. I mean, we've seen people in protest openly being anti-Semitic, waving the Palestinian flag, saying they want to rape Jewish people, Jewish women. With obviously the LGBT flag. I mean, it's you could argue it's a misogynist, homophobic flag, but those flags are absolutely fine according to the Labour Party. The one flag that the Labour Party take issue with is the English flag. If you think back to Emily Thornberry, we put that picture on Twitter of a person just showing the England flag outside their house, and she wanted to shame that person and call them a bigot. And then you see last year it was Sadiq Khan who said that during the Euros that taxi drivers shouldn't be putting the England flag on their taxis. It's always the England flag that they find issue with. It's never any other flag, because they are not patriotic. They hate the country, and all other flags or causes or activism is fine. But it's the English people and English identity that they are embarrassed by, and that's what this is all about.
I'll tell you what was embarrassing. So my best mate Belinda said to me at the weekend, did you know there's a St George's Day event at Trafalgar Square? And I was like, no, I did not. Under no circumstances has this thing been promoted. Let's go along and have a look. This says the Mayor of London presents St George's Day. There was absolutely nobody there. What I saw was somewhere selling some sort of shawarma, somewhere else selling Thai Chinese food. On the stage there was a group of school kids doing some beatboxing, and about 3 miserable people standing in the crowd, some pearly kings and queens who would have been amazing to see them. Love them, that's proper history. But it almost seemed to me that Sadiq Khan wanted to ruin it. Do you know what I mean? Like, he wanted to suck the energy out of it, because we're not allowed anything for ourselves. We're not allowed England to be for the English, or London to be British, or our flag to be celebrated, or us to be proud of our nation and all the brilliant things we've done. We're not allowed that. We have to either lambast everything about this country or pretend that we're nothing to do with it, that actually it's all been the work of immigrants, that actually everyone else's cuisine and languages and religious festivals and celebrations and cultures and dress and music is wonderful and brilliant and enriching, and we mustn't talk about our own.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I think Keir Starmer was right to say that the flag needs to be reclaimed, but it needs to be reclaimed from the woke left and from the Labour Party, who throughout the whole of the year will moan about England and say that, you know, we're a racist country and our history is terrible and we need, you know, we're a colonial country and we need to take it back and be proud of all of the things that you have mentioned. As you say, St George's Day is hardly ever promoted, and I think more and more people who are feeling like we are losing our national identity do want to celebrate it more, because they do want a day, and some people are even calling for a bank holiday. We do want a day. We're in dire need of a day where we can celebrate English, in being English, and England, and feel good about it. Right. Because every other day of the year we're told that we're trash, basically. But you know, even that one day, they have to undermine it.
Yeah, I mean, what are we going to do if English people all get together, right? If we celebrate Englishness, what is so scary about a Morris dancer? Do you know what I mean? The tropes and symbols of this country are men with little bells on waving handkerchiefs around, cricket, which is probably the most sort of, you know, a calm and gentle sport that one could imagine, and cucumber blimmin' sandwiches. I mean, what is so scary and dangerous about that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, well, Keir Starmer, of course, ignores all of those things, and he wants to now associate the flag with the riots, the Southport riots. I just remember, actually, during the Southport riots, it wasn't just the England flag that was being waved. People were waving the Union Jack flag, and not all of those protesters, of course, some of them became violent, but a lot of them had legitimate concerns. You know, 3 young children had just been killed by a terrorist, you know. And actually, I feel like a lot of people are concerned about the loss of national identity and the threat of terrorism from people outside of the country. None of that gets mentioned. It's always the threat of the far right. And as you say, England is an extremely pleasant and polite country. We, you know, all of our threats are coming from outside, and actually we need to celebrate those things.
We're probably the most pleasant, polite and tolerant country on this planet. Of that I am certain. I think we're probably the least racist country on this planet. We've done nothing but basically put good into the world, and yet we're supposed to hang our heads in shame. Amy, it's so good catching up with you. Let's go for a drink soon, my darling, because I really do miss you and your wisdom. Okay, right, we're going to be taking a short break now, but then it's time for the final hour of the programme. We're going to be joined by none other than Monty, Tim Montgomery, former number 10 advisor. I'm going to be putting to him some other news stories that have passed my desk. That's coming up just after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to the show. Alex Phillips sitting in for Kevin O'Sullivan with you for, about 58 more minutes. So do stay tuned, keep me company. Very lonely here in this studio all by myself. But I'm pleased to say I am alone no longer because I'm joined here live in the flesh by Mr. Tim Montgomery. Tim, I'd love it when I actually have guests. It makes a difference.
Oh, yeah, I was about to say, you're complaining about being on your own, and here I am.
Here you are. Yeah, people don't know what it's like
sitting in a little
It's been a long time
since I've been in the studio with you.
I know, I don't get to play as often in these studios as I'd like to. Now, we were talking.
Together,
let's play
minutes,
today.
Yeah.
Now, we were talking when you came in. I just said, oh, God, I just feel like it's the same news stories.
Yeah.
What do you want to talk about? And you said, let's talk about church attendance. And I thought, hey, that is very much my wheel part, because I put up a tweet saying that when I went to my church on Easter Sunday, and normally my church is always busy, okay? So spoiler, it is a very busy church. You have to kind of arrive there early and be
I saw one of your
prepared
videos from it. It's quite a lively church.
Oh, it's a very cool place to be. It's like the Glastonbury of Jesus. It's brilliant. But it is always busy.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I better get there early because it might be busier because it's Easter. Every single pew in the main body of the church was used. They've got balconies up at the top. People were sitting cheek by jowl. Down underneath in the crypt, there's 3 separate rooms and a cafe. All of those have been converted into seating areas. 2 outbuildings, those have been converted. And the whole service was sort of beamed out into all these various buildings on the entire church estate. I have no idea what that congregation was, but it was enormous. And I wrote
Is it quite multiracial?
Very.
Yeah,
it's central London.
That's one of the things about, you look, when I used to run the Conservative Christian Fellowship, it was the sort of the black majority churches who were
white people largely abandoned Christianity. It's our Commonwealth cousins who are keeping it alive, thank goodness.
My parents' church, it's been a Nigerian pastor who's come back really from Nigeria. He was, until recently, their pastor. I know that's true of Tom Tugendhat, a Catholic church in sort of Kent. I know another friend in Cornwall. It was almost like we evangelised Africa. Yeah,
and they're now evangelising us.
Coming back to,
we spread Anglicanism and they're keeping it alive.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, if it wasn't for them, did you watch the, you might not have done, but the Easter service, which was on the BBC from wherever it was?
No.
I am so glad
What's
you
the
didn't.
BBC?
I don't know, it's a disgrace is what it is. But the Easter service coming out of, I don't know if it's Canterbury Cathedral, I don't know, it's one of them. I tuned it on halfway through.
Probably York, given the change in the top of the church at the moment.
Actually true, there isn't really an Archbishop of Canterbury to conduct that service. But whoever it was, they didn't pay much. I feel it might have been Bristol, actually. Okay. Anyway, whoever it was like woke bingo. Oh my goodness. They mentioned within the whole sermon wasn't about Jesus dying, coming back to life, the hope that gave the world, what that represents, why that's so important.
It would have been about trans and about migrants and probably spending cuts or Trump.
No, you're missing the other vital one from their holy trinity.
Okay, what have I missed?
Climate change.
Of course. Yeah,
of course. It was inclusivity. It was climate change. And refugees. And I was like, oh, for God's sakes, is there nothing sacred? Literally, is there nothing sacred anymore? But when I put this thing up on Twitter saying my church is just bursting at the seams, it went viral.
Yeah, well, I quote tweeted you.
Over 1,000 messages underneath from people going, do you know what? Mine too, in a way I've never seen before. And it made the hair stand up on the back of my neck because it does feel something's happening.
Let me ask you a couple of questions. Well, one thing I should say first of all, this is happening despite the leadership of the church.
Right.
This is happening. I would say God's making this happen.
Yeah.
We talked about the sort of African sort of people coming back to re-evangelise us and tell us what we used to tell them. But are a lot of men coming to your church? Because one thing I'm hearing is it's like they're arriving at church, often having read Jordan Peterson, and they've got an understanding of the church and Christian teachings, but they never got through school, they never got through popular entertainment, certainly not through BBC's religious affairs broadcasting. They've got it from somewhere else. And so it's about men, it's about Africa, it's about Eastern Europe, and something really significant is happening, because I saw your tweet and then almost at exactly the same time people who are in the Easter services saying our churches are full.
Yeah.
And
up and down the country.
Easter and Christmas, there is always a bit of a rush, isn't there?
They're the busy periods, right?
But this was different.
This was
something is happening. I think it is probably a spiritual phenomenon, but also I think people see an Islamification of their country, which a lot of people are worried about.
Extremely.
And we all know that there are lots of very good Muslim people, but Islam is not the same as Christianity. It's a different religion, and I think people are saying, actually, maybe the religion, the Judeo-Christian basis of our society is worth defending. And I think people are going back to church partly for that reason.
I was speaking to an apostate the other day, a Jordanian who now lives in America, and like many apostates and people who've come from the Middle East, that he said to me, you have no idea what you're messing with. Take it from countries who know. And Lebanon in 1911 was 60% Christian.
Wow, yeah.
Barely any Christians there now. Gone.
It is one of the things that really hurts me, and it's our fault, it's not the Muslims' fault, is when I see an old church being converted into a mosque.
I know. I've got a really good reverend friend, actually, who's trying to buy a new church at the moment because it's for sale to developers, 250k up in Brierley Hill, I think it's Brierley Hill. I don't know how you say it, in the West Mids. Yeah. And no, the risk is that the Muslims are going to buy it and turn it into a mosque, and he's desperately trying to crowdfund to make sure that doesn't happen. And the problem is, a lot of people out there say, oh, well, I wish, would it be nice if we're still a Christian country? Wouldn't it be nice if people went to church? Wouldn't it be nice if we had a national identity, a sense of morality? If we had that fundamental framework, we wouldn't be having to go to the Supreme Court to say, gnarly Neil can't go into the girl kids lose. Yeah. It would be blimmin' obvious. We wouldn't have to sort of invent these neo-religions of celebrating 100. Refugees and trans and all this nonsense, because morality would have been from the top down, from a divine source, if you will, not for people to just make up themselves in a cultish way.
Can I say one other thing? So I saw your tweet on Easter Sunday, which I was very approving of, and I saw another tweet, which, look, I don't want to kick Keir Starmer particularly, but I don't know if you saw. Well, I do. But did you see his message, Easter message? And he was obviously trying, and I don't want to be too mean to him for that reason, but he wanted to thank.
He's very trying.
He wanted to thank Christians for what they had contributed to society.
Oh, okay.
And it was like we were like an add-on.
Oh, like a little funny minority group.
Everything else, Christianity, Britain was this big thing and Christians have made a little contribution. Yeah. I would say, I don't know whether you read it, Tom Holland's Dominion.
Oh, I've got it. It's on my bedside table.
It's one of the best books. Yeah. If I had to, top 5 books I've ever read.
Love that guy.
And he says, Western civilization, it's not a little bit formed on Christianity, it's completely formed on Christianity. Yeah. This country, its traditions, its liberties, its institutions, they owe everything to Christianity. And so for the Prime Minister, he was trying, but it just suggested to me an illiteracy. He doesn't understand this country. He doesn't understand what it's built on. If you don't recognise, you don't have to be a Christian, you don't have to be a Jew, but if you do not recognise the Judeo-Christian basis of our society, I don't think you understand this country.
It's interesting because, obviously Christianity's just lost a massive leader in the Pope, not my form of Christianity, but the big debate is always, when it comes to who's going to take these leadership positions, is what kind of leadership is it going to be? And we've been blighted in the Church of England by the wokery, which is basically just goes, oh yeah, the Bible, well, it had some good ideas, but actually we need to interpret it in this whole new way and ignore half of what it says. Because, well, it's a bit out of touch, isn't it? It's like, what? You can't, that's the word of God. What are you doing? But when it comes to
Jesus,
the Pope,
though, still has resonance, I think. I don't know whether you think... So we're getting very religious here tonight.
I didn't realise we were going to have a sort of religious programme. My producer's sitting there. What they put? Church popularity. They've made us strap to the screen because we sort of caught them by surprise.
But I don't describe myself as a Christian. I try and say I'm a follower of Jesus because what I say is Jesus still does have resonance. I think people still have an understanding of Jesus, and also, I'm sure you would agree, I'm far from perfect. None of us are perfect.
Right.
And following Jesus, it does suggest it's a journey.
Yeah.
It's like we're always learning, we're always moving, and sometimes we don't follow as closely as we ought to.
Yeah.
But actually, that following him and that his example, and the people have doubts about the Bible, but I think Jesus' teaching the example still has enormous
I always
power.
say, if you're not, because people say, a lot of people say, I'd love to believe, but I just don't, and I just can't. And I say, well, look, you can still celebrate Jesus as a historical figure.
Yep.
Look at his teachings, and look not just how they've shaped this country. You're right with what Tom, about that about Dominion, because what he's saying is it shaped the entire world.
100%. Yeah.
Before 2,000 years ago, people were literally in gladiatorial rings, and the abuses going on in Roman homes underneath the auspices of, the male of the household. It was vile. It was blood-curdling, narcissistic, pretty much lawless, just really unpleasant. And especially when it comes to women as well, the person who protected and gave women so many rights was Jesus. He's the one who said, right, no more of this infidelity, no multiple wives, you just have one wife and you'll look after her. Yeah. And he also said at the Last Supper to Mary Magdalene, you don't have to cover your hair. No, I don't believe in all of that stuff. I mean, hurrah, can I just say, for Jesus. Anyway, going back to the Pope.
Yes. Sorry, I took us off. Us off script.
Pope, the dead Pope, who people say he was a bit of a reformist. There are many things that I think was quite beautiful about that Pope. The fact that he wanted to exude humility, because again, you look at Jesus and his sandals, going about the place hanging out of fishermen. I don't understand sometimes all of the sort of, hell's bells and smells of the Catholic Church. Because I'm like, kind of not really the simplicity that, the Son of God went for. But he was in that respect. He did try and pare it back, look less extravagant. Apparently didn't wear some red shoes and stuff like this. But he also said, as I understand, that the whole trans argument was the blight of our times. He took that pretty seriously. But in other respects, he was seen as more of a moderniser. Yeah. People are talking about who might take his place, whether we could have the first black pope, like you said, the sort of re-evangelisation coming from the Commonwealth. And actually, when you look at those people who haven't, they've not allowed Christianity to be attacked by woke ideology, I actually think that would be a really good inheritor if it was someone from the Commonwealth who says, we're going back to the book.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really open choice for the next pope, because Pope Francis did choose amongst the cardinals he appointed, and he appointed a lot, people that were more liberal, more sort of, we were talking earlier about the BBC service and, the wokery of the Church of England. He did have that dimension to him, but at the same time, as you say, he also was quite radical in how he wanted a simplistic, Jesus-like modelling in his own life. So I think if you look at the cardinals he's appointed, the big question is, and I don't think anyone I know, people who I respect in terms of their understanding of the Catholic Church, they all say we don't know who they're going to choose, because yes, they're liberal, but they're also quite in his image. A lot of them are from Africa, and there isn't really a philosophy like Francisism. Right. And it's really unclear who they will choose. And what I hope they don't choose is, often after you look at the pattern of Catholic sort of history, they have a radical pope and then they have a grey pope. Yeah. It's almost like we need to simmer down for a little while, we need to go safe for a little while. I hope they don't go safe. I hope they ride someone who will ride this phenomenon we've just been talking about.
Right, and I would genuinely love to see a pope in the Commonwealth, not for tokenism, not so we have the black pope, but because, like I said, there is
sounding a bit British talking about the Commonwealth.
Oh gosh, better self-flagellate at the altar of Sir Keir Starmer. But it would be nice. There's Cardinal Turkson, I think, and Cardinal Sarah, who are the,
Cardinal Sarah's very impressive.
Yeah, I'd like one of those. Not that I'm a Catholic, got nothing to do with me actually. I should keep my neb out.
We'll probably blight them if we recommend anyone. So perhaps we should keep quiet, Alex.
Now let's talk reform, because you, of course, were set up Conservative Home. You used to be very much deep within the Conservative Party, and then you went over to
the turquoise side.
To the turquoise side, right? And as per usual, there's always these ideas about doing your deals and that the right wing is split. And, when you look mathematically right now at the polling with, a three-way split at the top, 25%, let's say for argument's sake, 25, 25, 25, Conservative, Reform, Labour, it's moving around all the time. And you do think, oh, well, if you added Conservative and Reform together, you get over half the vote, and the Labour Party are locked out. Wouldn't that be sensible? Yeah. And yet I don't think that will be the direction of travel.
No, and I think I've changed since I've joined Reform on this question, Alex. And honesty. And I can understand why the Conservative Party would want a deal, because I think they're in real trouble. I don't know if you saw the poll today from YouGov, but they're down at 20 points. You know, they've gone backwards since the election. Reform, I think, we're about 6 or 7 points ahead, which is an extraordinary position for Her Majesty's opposition to find itself, being outvoted by Reform. And so I can understand why they would want a deal. But as I've sort of seen how Reform's upscale potential is really to mine Labour voters. That's where the real disillusionment is. A lot of Tories, like me, have already joined Reform, and I think we're pretty committed. And some people doubt my commitment to Reform, but I'm absolutely committed to Reform. But the real upside potential for Reform is Nigel Farage, and you look at the seats he's going into. Runcorn is going to be. Have you been up in Runcorn? Are you allowed?
Not for this. No, not for this. No, I'm not allowed to campaign.
No.
Ofcom will have my guts for garters. No, not for this by-election. My dad used to be a car delivery driver, so he used to go to Runcorn to send cars on the ferry over to Ireland in his car transporter.
I'm hearing it's too close to call, but we'll see.
Right. Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, this has always been the case.
That will be the 16th safest Labour seat.
Yeah.
If Reform win that, it's a huge moment.
I could have told you this.
And it will send panic amongst Labour circles.
Back in UKIP days, when we did polling, because of course I used to be Nigel's right-hand woman in the UKIP days, we found that a third of the vote was coming from the Tories, a third from Labour, and a third from people who'd never voted before. And you just look in 2019, it's only because all of those Brexiteers would have voted the Brexit Party and Nigel stood down that Boris mopped up the red wall seats. The working class are the real floating voter now, and there's absolutely nothing working class related that this Labour Party is doing.
100%. And so Reform have a huge potential, and I think Labour have got a sniff of it. You can see some of the advertising that they are putting out. They're saying a vote for Reform is a vote for the Tories. I don't think that's true, but they know that that's the thing that might hold the working class from voting for the Reform. So there's no interest in Reform at all in doing a deal with the Tories. So I've done a complete 180 on this question, Alex, and I think, no deal.
It would be interesting to see how things play out in the future. We're a long way away from a general election, a long way away. And if all of a sudden we find out it's, general election's been called and the polling is as it is, I wonder if both sides would be tempted to say maybe there could be a sort of deal where when it's a seat that the Conservatives are likely to win but would lose it to Labour if Reform stood there, mainly the sort of Shires and the Lib Demi style seats, then perhaps back off.
You can see the Tories going easy in certain northern seats where Reform are clearly in second place, like Runcorn.
But the problem is I just don't think the Conservatives is to be trusted.
Well, that's a whole other question. I don't think there'll be a formal alliance, though, so it would have to be something informal.
I think if there's anything was going to happen, it would be, I don't know what that's called technically in politics, but a sort of,
understanding.
An understanding that if there's no way in hell for Reform to win a seat, but they deny the Conservatives, then that might be an option. But I know Nigel very well. I do not think he's got an appetite for that. That was supposed to be the deal in 2019, and the Conservatives behaved appallingly towards the Brexit Party.
It's ridiculous. I don't know. He may not have wanted it, but he should have been in the Lords. You think of all the people that have been put in the House of Lords. Nigel Farage hasn't been given anything by the establishment. The establishment still hate him for Brexit.
Do you know what? If they offered him the Lords, he'd probably turn it down.
They should do now.
Unless it was Lords cricket ground. They'd be there in a heartbeat. But what do you think's going to go on with the Conservatives? Because people are already sort of, they're baying for blood with Kemi Badenoch. She only became leader in November.
That's the Tory party, though.
What is wrong with them?
Well, it is the big thing. One of the big reasons that tipped me over in the end, Alex, was it's just a friend said to me, I used to remember when I had a dinner party who not to sit next to each other because you had to remember who hated who. And then they said, I've lost track now. I said, because everyone hates everyone. And it's like too long in government, too much failure, too many betrayed promises, and it's become a very unattractive. It's become Britain's most dysfunctional family.
It is very dysfunctional. They love sitting there and sort of figuring out who their enemies are and their enemies' enemies and their friends and factions and WhatsApp groups and plotting and how can we do this, and if we offer this person, they might come over to this side, then we'll do this. It's just like, what about policy? What about us? What about ideology?
Can you hear that in the background? That's Mrs. Thatcher turning in her grave, because if she knew what her party had become, she would hate it.
Oh, she'd been reformed by now.
Do you think so?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I'd like to think so.
Do you reckon she'd have been a fan of Nigel? Do you think she'd have thought he was brilliant? Or I think
he would have thought that he probably needed her advice. just like Nigel needs your advice, Alex. But
he's always got me the other end of the phone if he wants me.
Not that I'm saying you're necessarily Margaret Thatcher. I'm not sure she would have approved of your pink jacket.
Really?
Well, maybe she would. She was actually modelled British fashion, didn't she? Towards the end of her time, Aquascutum and all those brands.
I've never really gone down the subject of Margaret Thatcher's clothes, if I'm honest with you.
I was quite taken by Margaret Thatcher during my university years.
Was she your pin-up? Did you have one there?
I think we're not live anymore, are we?
No, we are. That's the joy of it. Yeah. We really are.
No, I did honestly. On my university wall when I was a student, I did have Margaret Thatcher.
Did you?
Yeah.
Do you know, here's a
only because she was an amazing Prime Minister.
Here's a dark confession. On my university wall, there used to be a magazine called Heat. Do you remember?
I remember Heat
magazine?
Yeah.
And they used to have Torso of the Week.
Oh, yeah.
And just as a joke, on my university wall, I actually had Tony Blair Torso of the Week. Yeah. I know.
No, I thought my confession was bad. Now you've
it was done in irony. It was done in irony. Tim, thank you so much for coming in.
Great. So we started off with Jesus Christ, and we ended up with talking about the torso of Tony Blair. Wow, that's quite. If we plotted that at the beginning, how did we get there? We wouldn't have known how to, would we?
Nope, absolutely not. Tim, it's wonderful seeing you as always. Thank you for actually coming into the studio. Right, we're going to take a short break now. When I come back after the break, we're going to be catching up with Mike Neville, former Met Police detective. We're going to be talking about Labour reviewing the two-tier bail rules that apparently favour minorities, and the Ministry of Justice saying probation officers must consider the trauma of ethnic minority criminals before they're sentenced. Back after this.
Keir Starmer hates talking about this topic. Yeah. He only ever speaks about it when absolutely forced to. And in the past, even then, he's just avoided the question altogether. So I think the reason that we're not seeing him come out really strongly against these protests with some really disgusting, violent, misogynistic placards is because he just wants to move on. He's said, okay, fine, I concede, a woman can't have a willy. I don't want to talk about this anymore. Yeah. I think that is what we're seeing, and that's why he's not coming out stronger.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Right, let's now talk about all things justice and policing with Mike Neville, former Met Police detective, a voice of common sense in this crazy world. Hi there, Mike. Right, I want to talk first of all about what Justice Minister Shabana Mahmood said, definitely not under my watch, it's not going to happen, which is this idea that probation officers have to consider the trauma of ethnic minority criminals before they are sentenced. And she said this would be two-tier, the law should be colourblind, this is absolutely not happening. But the UK government is now reviewing these bail guidelines introduced by the Ministry of Justice after saying that the rules were unfairly introduced. But her department, from everything coming out of the Ministry of Justice, seems to want to push ahead with it. I mean, this must, as a man who sort of, you know, was on the beat and you actually see the reality of who's committing crimes and why and what sort of crimes they're committing, this sort of stuff must make you sick to the back of your teeth.
It does make me sick to the back of my teeth. And in Britain, we've always said that justice is blind. You know, the statue of justice is often the goddess who is blindfolded, so you can't see skin colour, sex or sexuality or anything like that. And it's just a vile situation in it where people can claim that there's some sort of, because of slavery 200 years ago, you know, I should get bail out of court. Well, my great-great-grandmother was put in service like a slave at 8 years old. So should I get some kind of extra cards to play when I'm arrested or whatever else? And it simply cannot carry on. All the time they seem to be trying to fiddle the figures to show that certain people are more innocent than others. And this is just not good enough for Britain. It's just very, very bad. You know, it can't carry on, Alex.
No, I agree. And actually, if we start going down this route and put these things into law, we are in deep, deep trouble, because we'd end up having, because once things are on a statute book or sort of put into guidelines, judges and probation officers just have to follow them blindly, a bit like Sir Keir Starmer does. Oh, I've got clarity now because something's in law. But what would happen is you'd have rape gangs and people in county lines all going, yeah, I've done all this atrocious stuff, but it's because of my skin colour. Oh, sorry. I mean, it's abominable. I want to talk to you as well about this story, because this is really interesting, right? Police officers who fail background checks will be automatically sacked. That's a new law that's been introduced by Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, requiring all serving police officers in England and Wales to pass mandatory background checks. If they fail these vetting processes, they'll be automatically dismissed. Now, there have been a number of high-profile cases of police officers with troubling histories. Wayne Couzens, of course, David Carrick. And so there was, you know, rightfully so, a lot of upset and concern about whether certain people in the police force could be trusted. But my concern, I don't know what this vetting procedure fully involves. And my concern, I suppose, is that it doesn't go so far that someone who might have just, you know, committed a tiny peccadillo in their youth and actually as a character who'd make a great police officer finds himself booted out of a job. I mean, do you welcome this? Do you think this is exactly what should have happened, or are there any concerns?
Yeah, so I've got concerns. So really there's two issues here, Alex. One, you're talking about people who are joining the police. So the vetting takes place before you join the police, and that enables you to join. Really, these rules are concerned with people who are already in the police, people like Wayne Couzens and David Carrick. One of the officers who was involved in a recent High Court case was where he'd been accused of various sexual matters. None of these have been proved. None of them had ever really resulted in disciplinary. And the rules almost is there's no smoke without fire, and you could get booted out. And what the High Court rule was, you're entitled to some sort of fair hearing, a fair trial. And we do not want bad people in the police, but we live in a society where you have to be found guilty. You can't just have this, as I said, no smoke without fire. And my concern is if you're a very good detective and you were attacking an organised crime group, that they could arrange for people to make various accusations against you, that you'd committed some sexual crimes. These cases were never proven, but over a number of years, it's like, oh, look at all this all added together, and you get the boot. And so it's got to be really careful about that. And what strikes me all the time, of course, is the MPs who bring this in. Would the MPs have this for themselves? Would MPs allow themselves to be vetted like this? Because I tell you now that a lot of MPs would be booted out if they applied the same rules. So if they want to apply these rules to police officers, let them apply them to themselves.
Yeah, I think it's about making sure that wrongs of the past are righted, but not doing an overcorrection. Apparently tasers are now going to be trialled in prisons. This follows the attack from the brother of the Manchester Arena bomber on prison officers at HMS Frankland in County Durham. There have been recent reports as well about Muslim gangs basically running prisons, and people who aren't in the Muslim gangs having to be put into segregation. I mean, how bad are the insides of our prisons, Mike?
Well, it's nothing like Porridge. You know, people imagine it's like, you know, the comedy series Porridge with Ronnie Barker. It's nothing like that. But I tell you, a simple solution to a lot of this, Alex, is to start doing what they did in Porridge, having people like Mr. Mackay, who's got his army medals on his chest. There should be no women in men's prisons, and the other way around. But the real problem is that you have a lot of violent and wicked men in prison, and what you don't need is a lot of 25-year-old girls. We know why there's different sports in the Olympics, men and women. Men are bigger and stronger than women, and let's get back to common sense. We need men, ex-armed forces in our prisons ruling, you know, getting a grip. We can't carry on like this. So you can have as many tasers as you want. But if you've got 3 or 4 burly blokes, they can take out one burly bloke. I'm afraid 3 girls can't take out 1 burly bloke. It's as simple as that.
Yeah,
have a taser.
I agree. It's amazing, actually. I'm glad you brought up that topic, because I totally think it's unsuitable. You know, violent men, you shouldn't have women anywhere near them. But one thing that I've noticed, I don't know if anyone else has noticed this, is this huge uptick in female prison officers having flings with the inmates. And I keep seeing story after story, and every time you see, you know, the prison officer looks like some sort of pouting OnlyFans model. And you just think, how on earth is that a thing? I think you could go through all the psychology of women being attracted to a bad boy and this, that and the other. But it's so unsuitable when men are being put away for the detention in an all-male environment to have a woman strutting about like she wants to be a page 3 model.
It's absolutely crazy. I was speaking to a former prison officer, colleague, friend of mine, and he said when he first joined, they brought this in, and it was all to do with equal opportunities. The reason for prison is to punish and lock away offenders and perhaps to rehabilitate them. Its role is not to provide equal opportunities. But the trouble is that men are bad. 95% of prisoners are men. And so what they said is, we've got to let women have a go and they've got to have a turn in the men's prison. But of course, men are, as we've described, wicked and evil. And these villains are also very manipulative. And you've got these young girls, and what you said, Alex, there is this attraction to bad boys and all this sort of thing. So let's just get rid of it. There's a simple way to sort this out. Women in women's prison, men in men's prisons. That's the end of it. Finished.
Right, and I think that making sure that there's that sort of track to employment for veterans is a brilliant idea, can I just say, Mike? Now, finally, before I let you go, another report has revealed the shocking decline of HMP Park in Bridgend, once considered one of Britain's best prisons. It has been now plagued by drugs and violence. There's been the deaths of 17 inmates in 2023. Drugs are just being flown in with drones. So it used to be a completely privately managed prison. And full disclosure, when I was a reporter at the BBC, I actually went to visit it, and it was quite an incredible institution. They had a workshop, and there were sort of offenders working on all sorts of brilliant carpentry. It was modern. Now it seems like just some sort of screaming hellhole, like an all-round spiced-up party. I mean, why has everything declined to this level? And one assumes that if you've got people just, you know, hanging around in prison, getting themselves off on illegal drugs to the point that they're dying, that this isn't exactly a rehabilitation exercise.
It's crazy. I mean, I read about the prison. One of the things, you can open your window. Well, do you know what? If you can open your window, somebody can fly drugs to the window in a drone. It's absolute craziness. Why are these things? Why is common sense missing? Why are the common sense, men in a men's prison, women in a women's prison, common sense in a prison, you can't open the window? Where has all this gone? We just seemingly, as a country, we seem to have gone quite mad, really. And again, in that prison, the nurse had an affair with one of the inmates. It's just, let's get back to Porridge. Let's have Mr. Mackay running our prisons again. And a lot of these problems would never occur in the first place. bad management. I bet you the management of that prison have been more interested in equal opportunities and diversity policies rather than locking up the prisoners securely. The lack of focus on this, it's in the police, it's all over the place, is what's wrong with this country. Do what you're supposed to do.
Well, there you go. I couldn't have put it better myself. Mike Neville, thank you ever so much. I think we could do with Nabil Bukele sending us some of his prison officers. He's the leader of El Salvador, where he threw like 1/3 of the population into clink because they're all sort of the tattooed-faced gang members, and he's got them all sitting at sewing machines. And he's even said to Donald Trump, oh, you know, you got South American and Central American gangsters in your country. We'll have them. We got all these super prisons now. I'm like, brilliant. Can you sort of spare us a few prison officers? Tell us how to do it properly. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but don't go anywhere, because for the remainder of the time here at Talk Towers, we're going to be open and receptive to you. It's the opportunity for you to take control of this show. Tell me what's on your mind. Share your thoughts and feelings on anything we've been speaking about. Why not throw a completely new subject into the mix? We're liberal like that. We don't care. We're just an open talking shop for everybody, because this is the home of common sense. The number to call if you want to get involved, and I sure want you to, is 0344 499 1000, charged at your normal network rate. You can use that message number to send me a message on WhatsApp, or leave me a voice note. You know how much I care for those. 87222 is the number to text me. If you're going to use that, you have to write the word talk before you type out your message. We're on X at talkTV, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from some of you after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Roll up, roll up. This is your opportunity to hear your own voice on the airwaves. Let's go first to David, who's in London. Hi there, David.
Hi, Alex. Hi. It's about why people are leaving the country.
Yeah. Oh, blimmin', I know loads of people doing that. I'd join them myself if I didn't care for this place so much.
Yeah, me too. Alex, I think one of the reasons is because we have a government and mayor who just want to take away the pleasure and fun out of life. Most people want to travel in a car or a bus, and businesses need vans and lorries, but using the roads for this is now a miserable experience because of their anti-road user policies.
Oh my gosh, you have just struck a chord with me, David. You have no idea what Pandora's box you have just opened. So get this right. Now, the other day, must have been about 3-4 weeks ago, I was off to see my mate in Kent, a mate who happens to be called Nigel. And that day, there were 2 junctions on the M25 were closed. So there was no way, if I was going down the M4, because I live in West London, down the M4 to the M25, I wouldn't be able to get to him that easily. And I thought, I've got to suck it up and just go through London, out through Croydon, you know, and that way, which is always a bit of a nightmare, if I'm honest with you. But there you go. So I sort of gear up to do that. And then they happen to close the Wandsworth Bridge. For people who don't live in London, basically, if you want to go from north of the river to south of the river, you've got to get over it. And so you need a bridge. And they've closed Hammersmith Bridge for gazillion years now. That thing ain't ever going to be opened. So it's already congestion. They closed another bridge. And it was nose to tail, just completely unmoving traffic, like nothing, not even an inch, nothing. For 45 minutes, I was at a complete and utter standstill. And it's a single road going along the river down to this, the one bridge that was open. Then all of a sudden, woo, 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 you hear the blues and twos coming behind you, can't see what it is. And all of a sudden, all the cars are sort of trying to eke around, going up onto pavements, moving in whatever tiny little bit of tarmac they can find to see if they can make space. So as all this jostling happens, I manage to inch forward and pull over to the left, and I see that I'm actually now near a road. And I think the best thing I can do is get off this road altogether. I ain't going anywhere anyway. I may as well head back to West London and see if I can figure out another route to Kent. So I go down the left-hand road, again, also making space for the emergency services vehicle, put in my sat-nav home, and I'm following my sat-nav, Google Maps, as it happens to be, because people are, oh, you've got to use your own car sat-nav, it's got to be Google Maps. No, it was Google Maps. I'm following the sat-nav to try and wend my way home, finally get there. Anyway, what comes through my letterbox 2 days ago? Right, so get this is mental, right? I am going to be fined, well, I've appealed it, but I'm going to be fined potentially £130, because do you know what my offence was? I happened to be driving in a particular direction, down a particular road, in a car that wasn't flagged up as belonging to a resident in what is now considered a clean air neighbourhood.
Yes, I know the area. I know the area you're talking about. Yeah, it's appalling.
What is that even about? Like, there were no signs. I didn't even know this thing existed. You can't drive here. You might find 130 quid. It's now a clean air neighbourhood. If I'd apparently been going down the road in the opposite direction, I don't think it would have counted. It's just this stuff. It's like they want us to just set fire to our cars in protest like the French do.
Yes. They've made dreadful decisions, and it's ruined everyone's way of life. You're so innocent, and yet you're treated like a criminal.
Yes. All the crims, just like, oh, well, you know, probably had a hard background, doesn't matter that you stabbed someone with a zombie knife, better not deport him. And then you're an ordinary law-abiding citizen who tries to always do right in this world, and you're just bombarded with penalty fines and, you know, it's just, it drives me to despair. It does make you go, F this, I'm going to go to somewhere where it's sane, where at least I feel I'm not straitjacketed by a mad socialist government. David, thank you, my darling. You've allowed me to sort of get something off my chest. Let's speak now to Trevor, who's in Edinburgh. Hi there, Trevor.
Hello, and thank you for taking the call.
Oh, my pleasure.
I wish I could phone up your station and say something positive about the United Kingdom, but I know from research and studies that I've done, both in college and out of college, that many people all over the UK, and in particular in London, are graduating in British universities. They're clever people, and they're flooding away to other countries. Now, I know at least 9 people who went to Germany, 4 that have went to Canada, 3 that are in America, and 2 that are en route waiting to get permission to go and live in New Zealand. Now, they're only a handful of people, and I know I don't speak for them all. But to put this in context, tonight I was speaking to a guy on the telephone, a guy that I know who lives in Glasgow. He's an economist. And he told me that Scotland and England and Britain are now as poor as the country of Slovenia in Eastern Europe. And by 2029, Latvia will overtake the United Kingdom in terms of its GDP. And I said, "Look, you're lying." He said, "No." He referred me to
I'm guessing he must be talking about GDP per capita, because that's the thing. Overall GDP, we're still in the G7. That's the sort of amount of cash money that the country as a whole makes. GDP per capita is where you work out, if you shared that money amongst every single person in the country, how much each would have. And I'd imagine that is where we've been hit the hardest, because you just look at the amount of people who are coming into this country sponging off the state, people who do absolutely naffle, and not just people coming into the country. The level of worklessness now is ridiculous. And then on top of that, you've actually got over 50% of people in employment are actually employed in public services. Yes, we need doctors and we need teachers, we need firemen, and we even need blimmin' politicians, etc. But when you've got it that more than 50% of your workforce is being paid by taxes and less than half is actually generating the money in that country, you're in real trouble. And this blimmin' government, they haven't got a clue how to, you know, promote manufacturing or growth. What do they go and do? They tax the farmers. They tax the people who actually run businesses.
Can I just say, may I just say that I really take this deadly seriously because I'm training, you know, for a diploma in economics. I want to just say finally to your listeners all over Britain, wherever part of Britain they live, if they go on the government, the UK government's website, and go to the part of the Inland Revenues Division that talks about tax avoidance, they will find out, as I did, that £37 billion went unpaid in taxes last year. 2023 till 2024 it was, and the black hole that Mr. Starmer talks about, 22 billion, would have been plugged by that money if it had been recovered by the fraud agencies, which are, I don't know what they're doing all day, and I don't know why they get paid, but they certainly are not making people pay their tax. And I've heard this referred to hundreds of times on programmes and in the newspapers. So although you're right in saying that people come into Britain and they're not allowed to work for a certain amount of time, therefore we have to spend taxpayers' money looking after them, the real problem, because that only costs £77 million a week, according to what I've been reading, but tax avoidance costs £37 billion a year. So look at a 5-year period. You're looking at £180 billion going down the Swanee. Anyway, thank you for taking my call.
Ah, my pleasure, Trevor. You've cheered us all right up. Right, if you want to be like Trevor and make your thoughts known, the number to call is 03444991000. This will be your last opportunity because, of course, I go off air at 10 o'clock. So dial that number now. I'd love to hear from you after the break. And see if I can get through some of your messages as well. I'm back just after this.
Keir Starmer hates talking about this topic.
Yeah.
He only ever speaks about it when absolutely forced to. And in the past, even then, he's just avoided the question altogether. So I think the reason that we're not seeing him come out really strongly against these protests, some really disgusting, violent, misogynistic placards, is because he just wants to move on. He's said, okay, fine, I concede, a woman can't have a willy. I don't want to talk about this anymore.
Yeah.
I think that is what we're seeing, and that's why he's not coming out stronger.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Right, let's speak now to Harry, who's in Portsmouth. Hi there, Harry.
Oh, yes. Hello, Alex. I remember you saying that your father was a lorry driver.
He used to be, yeah. He's 2 replaced dips now. He couldn't scuttle up that ladder to put the cars on the top deck if his life depended on it.
Too much clambering. Yeah, I mean, when COVID was on, we had this subject come up of, we need every lorry driver we can get. They're wonderful people, you know, the usual. And within days, they were saying, well, we can't go here, we can't go there, no one wants us there. And, you know, all the facilities, the canteen, you know, the motorway canteens were refusing some lorry drivers because of COVID.
Yeah.
And then the subject of toilets for lorry drivers came up. And around that time, there's also the subject to say women lorry drivers who can't find toilets at all, because we all know where we men lorry drivers end up going.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up, because people forget this. We all have to stand on our doorstep and bang our saucepans and clap for the doctors and nurses. Great, okay. But lorry drivers were out there day after day making sure that food was on shelves, medicines were in hospitals, that whatever people were ordering while they sat under their slankets to be delivered to their home was delivered to their home, and were given no support because, like you said, Harry, they closed the service stations. They even closed the toilet facilities. So lorry drivers had to relieve themselves out in nature. I mean, how on earth that worked out for women, I don't know. And what a disgusting, despicable way to treat people who work blimmin' hard. I know the time that my dad's alarm would go off when he had to go to work on a Monday morning, about 4 a.m. And then he would spend all week in the lorry, sleeping on the little bench at the back. He'd be home late on a Friday. Sometimes he couldn't get home because tachograph said, oh, sorry, because there was a diversion, you're going to have to pull over and sleep here instead. If there were no such thing as lorry drivers, nothing would happen. The country would grind to a halt. And also, most of these big firms completely betrayed British lorry drivers who have to take all these exams and have regular medicals and all this legislation they need to follow, because they could pay someone who basically had a lorry driver's certificate printed off on word art for the cost of 10 quid. They could pay them less than minimum wage, or far less than they were paying an actual skilled worker in this country. We really treated lorry drivers abysmally for about 10 years, probably more. Were you a lorry driver, Harry?
Yeah, I was in the past. I was considering renewing my licence during the COVID period, and I thought, wait a minute, they're saying there's this terrible, well, to me it became a con in the end, this terrible disease, you know, which we're pretty certain came from Wuhan.
Of course it did.
The only time they won't say anything about it is because they've got other important things to talk about. Why talk about the past?
Oh, they just don't want to upset the Chinese, that's the thing.
Yeah, this brings me back to, of course, the trans debate.
Yeah.
As you know, as soon as things go the wrong way for any pressure group, they're immediately got their reserve plans lined up.
Oh, they do.
Oh, there'll be unisex toilets, which we know some of you media people have got in London because they're always forever on about, you know, unisex toilets.
Not in Talk Towers. We have really good toilets in Talk Towers, can I just say. It might be a rival organisation that has unisex toilets.
But the thing is, they could have, way back in 2004 on the Gender Recognition Act and the 2010 Equality Act, if they knew it might have gone a different way, or or whatever, they might have said, well, we've got to have some reserve type toilet system.
Why didn't they? Because there's already our disabled loos. They already are disabled loos. It'd be easy enough to say there needs to be a toilet in the building specifically for trans people, right? Because how many trans people are there? They're like, 500 working in every office. I don't think so.
Yeah,
It was so easy to solve. And that's the point. It was never about that. It was never about that. It was about something quite dark and sinister. Harry, my darling, thank you so much for phoning me. Oh, it's Cindy in Michigan. I haven't spoken to Cindy in ages. How are you, Cindy?
Alex, hey! Oh my God, you're such magic. You just are. I love your show. I love whenever they put you on talkTV.
Oh, thanks, Cindy. I love having you on.
Happy St. George. Well, thank you, and happy St. George's Day. I wanted to say to everyone, fly your flags proudly. Be proud, because whenever I get a chance to wear my UK bootstraps, I do. I'm proud of UK people, UK music, UK everything.
What's your favourite thing about us then, Cindy? Go on. It is, in theory, St George's Day, though it's a bit delayed this year for technical Christian reasons.
I've heard.
But what is it you like so much about we Brits?
Oh God! You know what? The Brits have everything down when it comes to music. You have it all. I know we had Elvis Presley. I know we had, but I think of the Beatles. I don't think of the King. I think of the Beatles. When I think of rock and roll and where it came from, it started with the UK first. That's where I see music. And I just love British people. You have manners. You're beautifully well-spoken. You care about people. You care about family. You love your British tea, your tea time.
We do love our tea. I mean, I'd love to say we all spoke beautifully and cared about our families, but I think that's probably a sort of whimsical view of Britain these days. I'm not sure how true that is. Although I must admit, one thing I do love.
I'm coming in November.
Are you? Are you going to come visit us here at Talk Towers?
Yes. Oh, I am.
I bet you are. We'll get you in the studio there, Cindy. You can be my presenter's friend, as we call it in the trade.
I'd love to.
Well, how long are you coming over for?
Maybe about a week. I want enough to see Let Women Speak. Kelly J. Keane.
Oh, she's amazing.
She does a thing in the park.
Oh, Speaker's Corner. You want to go and go to Speaker's Corner and see if you'll get arrested or beaten